or £1 billion we could spend on schools. It's £1 billion we can spend on the health service. But even after you spent that £1 billion...
And we'll leave this discussion here to British Parliament as they begin debate on a non-binding measure that would ban Donald Trump from entering the United Kingdom. This is live from London.
Because the first petition has been signed by more people than any other in this Parliament. It's signed by 573,971 signatures, and it calls to block Donald J. Trump from UK entry. The second petition is don't ban Trump from the United Kingdom, and this is a curious one. It's signed by 42,898 signatures, but 30 signatures were removed from that petition because they were thought to be suspect and coming from one source. So please beware, anyone who's trying to rig the system, you will be found out. And in this case, 30,000 signatures disappeared. The first petition reads, the signatories believe that Mr. Donald J. Trump should be banned from UK entry. The UK has banned entry to many individuals for hate speech. The same principles should apply to everyone who wishes to enter the UK. The United Kingdom is to continue applying their unacceptable behaviour criteria to those who wish to enter its borders. It must be fairly applied to the rich as well as the poor, and the weak as well as the powerful. And the other petition reads, we shouldn't be banning anyone for their opinions or domestic actions in a US political race that doesn't concern us. But more importantly, if he does actually win the nomination and then goes on to win the presidency, we then have to work with a man who we banned from our country. Let's mind our own business. If I can summarize the government's response, which wasn't entirely helpful, to both petitions, and the government says the government does not routinely comment on individual immigration and exclusion decisions. Exclusion powers are very serious and are not used lightly. The Prime Minister has made clear that he completely disagrees with Mr. Donald Trump's remarks. The Home Secretary has said that Donald Trump's remarks in relation to Muslims are divisive, unhelpful, and wrong. The government recognises the strength of feeling against the marginalisation amongst those it endeavours to protect. The government doesn't directly answer questions on those that are banned, but they did publish a list of 20 who were denied entry to the United Kingdom between 2008 and 9. And if I could give you some idea, I won't mention the names, we don't give them extra notoriety, but the sort of people who are banned. And the first one was a leader of a violent gang that beat migrants and posted films of their attacks on the internet. He was considered to be engaging in unacceptable behaviour by fomenting serious criminal activity and seeking to provoke others to serious criminal acts. Another one was described as a preacher, considered to be engaging in unacceptable behaviour by fomenting terrorist violence in furtherance of his political beliefs. Another one was considered to be engaged in unacceptable behaviour by seeking to provoke others to serious criminal acts. A fourth one was a Muslim writer and public speaker from India. He was excluded from the United Kingdom because he had made anti-Jewish statements and thus fostering hatred amongst others. And those are entirely typical of the kind of people who were excluded. And I think we should say that the situation with Mr. Donald Trump, it doesn't apply in those cases. These are far more serious and presented an immediate threat of violence. The petitioners claim that there has been violent attacks taking place in America, in Boston and elsewhere, with people who quoted Donald Trump when one of them attacked a Hispanic person, another one attacked a Mexican, it's alleged. And that's what the petitioners are making their points on. But I believe there is one case that does represent the situation with Mr. Donald Trump. And that's the one with Mr. Geert Wilders, who a Dutch a person who was seen to be fomenting hatred against Muslims and guilty of homophobia. And he was banned by the Home Secretary in 2009. And what happened was Mr. Wilders appealed to the court and won. And the result was that he was allowed into the country. The publicity and attention he had for his Islamophobia in his film was multiplied 100-fold by the ban. And I believe that's something that we should bear in mind. Yes, of course.
I'm most grateful to my honourable friend for giving me that, and I congratulate him on leading this debate and securing this debate. Does he share my concern about the number of cases that have come to light since the comments made by Mr. Trump, but not because of what Mr. Trump said, of British Muslims who have been refused admission to the United States of America? And does he agree with me that when that happens, whether they are Muslims or not, there should be a clear indication of why people have been refused admission to America?
The figures are worrying, but of course we're still in a position where the President of America is still Barack Obama, and I'm sure that he would look with equal disapproval of these instances, but they need to be investigated. But that certainly is something of considerable concern. But Mr. Wilders' case is one of great significance to us, I think. Those who wrote the main petition said this: freedom of any kind comes with a responsibility. This includes free speech. Freedom of speech is not the freedom to engage in hatred. Words can wound, and wounds can be a rallying cry to violence. The reality of hate speech's ability to incite violent acts is why the UK laws have stopped some 80 individuals from entering the UK to date. They quote the petitioners certain violent acts that have taken place in America that they put down to Mr. Trump's intervention. I think we want to make it clear the way that this has been reported throughout the world. It's caused an enormous amount of attention. That this is no attempt to disrespect in any way Americans or the American state. This is a country of which our cultures have melded together over the years, getting ever closer. This is the country that's sacrificed more of its sons and daughters in the cause of creating democracy in other countries than any other nation on earth. This is the land of Barack Obama, of Martin Luther King, and Abraham Lincoln. The great, yes, indeed.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Would you not agree with me that the fact that it is Martin Luther King Day today makes this even more bizarre, that this hate figure is preaching these ridiculous things that we should reject?
Yes, I think it's a very significant day. And this Martin Luther King, of course, was a great man who left a great legacy behind him. But I think we should look to see what we're doing in this case and what we were doing by pursuing a cause which would expel the... yes, it goes.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman, and I appreciate the balanced way in which he is presenting his argument. The election of his own party leader has shown that remarkable things happen in politics. So we have to be alive to the possibility that this ridiculous individual, that is Mr. Trump, may be elected as President of the United States. In that event, would such a ban be overturned, since if it was not, it would be one almighty snub to the American citizens to which he has been referring?
I'm sure that's absolutely right. And the great difficulty that we're in is in showing disrespect for Mr. Trump. It might well be interpreted by supporters and others in America as showing disrespect to the American nation. This is not what we're saying. It's one individual that's involved in this. But could I put it to the committee that the great danger by attacking this one man is that we can fix on him a halo of victimhood. We give him the role of martyrdom, which can seem to be an advantage among those that support him. The line will go out, here's these foreigners interfering, telling us what to do. And I think that would be a grave error if we gave them that situation and allowed our deliberations today to seem to be anti-American. There was a number of people who said that we shouldn't discuss this issue. It shouldn't be debated today. But it would have been very difficult to ignore a vox pop that's so thunderous, that contains the signatures of 500,000 people. And the whole purpose of the Petitions Committee is to say that it's not just MPs, parties, governments, opposition that decide what the agenda is here in Parliament. It's the public can decide, and this is the public speaking with a very loud voice indeed. I think our best plan is not to give him that accolade of martyrdom in that way. I think we may already be in error by giving him far too much attention in the way that this petition is singled on him, but he has done some remarkable things which have caused a great deal of upset. Yes.
I too the balanced way that honourable member is giving this debate. Does he not feel that, particularly today, it seems that anyone who offends anyone, and we all do it almost on a daily basis, sometimes unknowingly, and I do all the time apparently, debate is immediately shut down. This is the danger to democracy, and I've seen, I believe, in this country, debate about a whole range of things is shut down because you're labelled as a xenophobe, right-wing or left-wing, whichever it may be. Let's hear the debate, and if it's unreasonable, ignore it.
I think that's right. The instances that have been drawn to our attention by the petitioners is that Mr. Trump mocked in a cruel way a man for his disability, that he did say to the people of Mexico that he bundled them up as people who were rapists and drug abusers. He made some degrading remarks about women, and the latest one is to suggest that the Muslims not be allowed into his country, which is an extraordinary thing to say, an extremely dangerous thing to say. And I believe that what we're faced with is the most dangerous position between the nations in my lifetime. And I can clearly remember the start of the Second World War. But I believe what the situation we have in the world today, with the Al-Qaeda and Daesh and the other similar groups spread throughout a score of countries, is to divide the world between Christians and Muslims. They have a mad plan that one day there'll be a war between Christians and Muslims, the Muslims will win, and they will establish their caliphate throughout the world. The most alarming thing is what's happening with our young people in this country, in my constituency and elsewhere, where they have this almost irresistible appeal to adolescents to say that, come and join us. We can right ancient wrongs. You can take part in a battle. You can have a wife or a husband. You can have a great adventure serving your religion. And the possibility at the end of it is martyrdom followed by eternal bliss. And this is the kind of way that the seduction used by many cults over the years. And sadly, there are hundreds of our young people falling for this. And if we react in the way we do to the terrorist attacks by joining in wars and battles, the world's in a very dangerous place. And while we have no right to inform Americans on who they should elect as leader, we do look forward with some trepidation to a future when difficult decisions have to be taken. And should they be taken by a person who is seen to be impulsive, not well informed, and someone who has been accused of racial views? Or should it be, yes?
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I see that he's coming down on one side of the argument, that Mr. Trump should not be banned from entering this country. Are we not in a unique position here? I cannot think in my lifetime of another senior politician in America or anywhere else wishing the government of that country to deny our citizens in the United Kingdom free international movement because of their religion. And if my honourable friend is to take the position that he's doing, can I ask then, what would be an appropriate response for this country to the United States of America in order to protect the people that we represent?
Well,
we have a significant number of members who wish to contribute to the debate. I really must ask at this stage that any interventions be very brief, please. Mr. Flynn.
okay, I think that it's premature. We have had an intervention on this before. And of course, it'd be an outrage if that was to happen. And it's certainly contrary to all American history. The words written on the Statue of Liberty is there. It'd be denial of the best in America's history and in her hospitality to those who wish to live in her country. I would urge the alternative of inviting him here, and I'd be delighted if he could show us where the so-called no-go areas for police are in this country. I've never been able to find one. It'd be a pleasure to take him down to Brixton and show him the rich mixture of races and creeds that are living happily together there. And perhaps it'd be interesting to have a chat about why in America there are more people killed by shotguns every day than are killed every year in this country. And the leader of the opposition has suggested a trip to Islington around the mosques and possibly a meeting with his wife, who I understand is from Mexico. And I'm sure that'll be a very interesting conversation they'd have there. But I believe that we should greet the extreme things that this man says by our own reasonableness and our own hospitality. We should greet him with courtesy if he come here, but we shouldn't build him up by our attacks. There was, if I can say in conclusion, Mr. Gale, that there was another great Republican who said in 1990, "Democrats and Republicans, I salute you. And on your behalf, as well on behalf of the entire country, I now lift my pen to sign this Americans with Disabilities Act and say, let the shameful wall of exclusion finally come tumbling down." Those are the words of President Bush. And it was absolutely right. That act for those who are disabled led similar acts in nations throughout the world. And I think we should look to what we're seeing from Donald Trump at the moment. And we must confront his words of prejudice, of lack of knowledge, of intolerance, and what we should greet him with is a welcoming hand of friendship, of knowledge and truth. And then perhaps more shameful walls of prejudice will come tumbling down.
The question is that this House has considered e-petitions 114003 and 114907 relating to the exclusion of Donald Trump from the UK. Could I just, for the moment, could I ask all honourable members who wish to speak to stand? Just want to get some idea. Okay. Thank you very much. I am proposing immediately to impose a... Thank you. Sit down. I'm proposing immediately to a time limit of 6 minutes. If honourable members are willing to adhere to that, then it may be that we can get most, if not all, members who wish to speak into the debate. For the convenience of members, I don't normally do this from the chair, but I think given the number of people that are seeking to catch the chair's eye, it might be helpful. On the opposition benches at the moment, that is to say people who've indicated in advance of the debate that they wish to be called, I have Tulip Siddiq, Gavin Robinson, Naz Shah, Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh, Keith Faz, Corey Wilson, Jack Dromey and Gavin Newlands. And on the government benches, I have Paul Scully, Sir Edward Lee, Tom Tugendhat, Victoria Atkins, Steve Double, Lucy Fraser, Philip Davies, Simon Hoare, and Kwasi Kwarteng. Those who are not on this list at this point, in other words, those who have not indicated in writing that they wish to speak, may choose to seek to intervene rather than to seek to be called. Paul Scully.
Thank you, Mr. Gale. And I'd like to congratulate the honourable member for Newport West for leading the debate, fellow member of the Petitions Committee. I was keen to participate in this debate, not just for the substance of it, but also to echo the sentiment that the honourable member has said about why we've actually decided to hold this debate today, because it's something that actually has caught the eye of the media, and some people have been concerned about our discussions. We actually have the mechanism in place that anything over 100,000 signatures, we will seek to at least allow the members of the public to have a voice in this place, whether that be through a select committee, whether that be through a wider debate that's already going on, research that we're doing. For example, we're doing things as a committee in looking at research into brain tumours. In this instance, as has been the case in several others instances, it's appropriate for us to give the members of the public a voice in this chamber here in Westminster Hall. Donald Trump's favourite columnist, UK columnist, Katie Hopkins, actually asked on John Pienaar on Sunday, John Pienaar's radio programme on Sunday, why we weren't debating other things like the immigration debate, that petition that had gone through and received a number of signatures. And the reason for that, she claimed that it was actually down to us being politically correct. It was nothing of that sort. It was actually that we'd already had an immigration debate, which I led on back in October, which was worded in a very, very similar manner. So it was more appropriate that we actually push on with this, and we don't want to duplicate work wherever possible. Honourable Member for Newport West actually forgot one petition that we should roll up in this. There's one that, as of this morning, 75 people had signed, inviting Donald Trump to address Parliament. So maybe that's an additional one that we might want to consider. Now, the committee, our debate today is not going to result in a vote. It's important that members of the public that are watching this understand that. It's not for us to decide whether Donald Trump should or should not be allowed into this country. That's a matter for the Home Secretary, deciding whether any visit that he may make is conducive to the public good or not. But what it does do is allows us to have our say, and she will, I'm sure, be listening. Now, I know we've had some examples of when people have been excluded from this country. I've heard of a number of cases where people have been excluded for incitement and for hatred. I've never heard of one for stupidity. And I'm not sure that we should be starting now. I think I totally agree that we shouldn't be focusing on one man. What I would like us to do over the next few hours is to look at the issues that have really surrounded this and how they affect the UK. And that's the wider issues really are immigration, global security, the positive contribution that people with Muslim faith have on this country, whether they were born in this country or whether they've come to this country and added to our economy, to our culture, and to our community. As I said, I led a debate yeah, please.
On that point, is the honourable member aware that the second most populous petition on the petitions website, with 457,000 signatures, is one to debate stop all immigration and close the UK borders until ISIS is defeated? And does that motion show why it's important to challenge views such as Donald Trump's in a robust, evidence-based and democratic way?
Absolutely. My honourable friend makes a really, really important point. And this was actually, that was a very similar wording to the debate that I led in October. There are a lot of petitions out there that have quite insightful and clumsily worded, in many ways, approaches, because there is a fear of immigration, there is a fear of global security, and I suspect that Donald Trump's words actually were born out of fear himself, although as an aspirant leader, he should be leading to clearer understanding of this issue. It's not acceptable for him to just to say, we need to stop immigration of this sort until we understand what's going on. That's not acceptable for an aspirant world leader. We know the benefits of controlled immigration in this country. As a son of someone that was born in Burma, I'm half Anglo-Indian, I've seen the benefits of good immigration, where people contribute to this country, make no claims on social services, that have incredible aspirations for education and for hard work. But mass uncontrolled immigration does actually put a lot of pressure on our services, infrastructure, and it does put a lot of concern into people's minds. And I suspect, as in America, the UK feels this as well, hence the number of signatures to this petition. But we need to tackle it in a very, very different way. We need to speak about the positive contribution to business investment, to science and medical procedures, to culture as well. Many of you know that I actually have quite a bit to do with the British curry industry, with my parliamentary group hat on, and just that one industry alone is worth £3.5 billion to £4 billion, depending on who you speak to this country, to this country's economy. It employs 100,000 people, and there are a number of people that are affected by that, and we all enjoy a curry every day, and I think it would be a bad thing to the UK economy if actually that continued to struggle. But that's just one small industry. Let's look at the medical industry. Let's look at let's look at business as a whole as well, and the input that immigrants have on this country. We need to tackle, though, in terms of global security, we need to look at the counter-extremism strategy that this government has, the counter-terrorism strategy that this government has. These are ways that are far more clever, far more positive, and far more practical than an impractical case of just closing the country down to people from one faith. How do you actually determine someone from one faith? Do you actually put a badge on them? Do you have them on a database? I think, although he's not gone quite so far as to put a badge on them, Donald Trump has actually not excluded keeping people on a database, which is an extraordinary situation to go down. So I'll bring my remarks to a close because we're on a very limited time. But I do think that I hope that over the next few hours we'll be able to concentrate on practical ways that this country can tackle immigration and can tackle community cohesion rather than worrying about the ego of one man.
Tulip Siddiq.
Thank you, Mr. Gale. It's a pleasure to serve on the chairmanship. The arguments about why we're having this debate has already been articulated by the honourable members who came before me, but I wanted to raise the question of why this online petition, which has been signed by 3,000 of my constituents in Hampstead and Kilburn, has evoked such emotion. Is it because Donald Trump's comments mean that he is tarnishing the entire Muslim community with the views of a small group of extremists, the views of whom ordinary Muslims absolutely condemn? Or is it because the world's largest economy might be excluding the world's second largest religious community, over 1.6 billion people in the world? Or is it because people in this country are proud of the long history that we have of welcoming immigrants, welcoming refugees, and welcoming asylum seekers? People often say that the public are apathetic about politics. This online petition, signed by nearly 600,000 people, shows that when people feel a sense of justice, when people feel that we need to stop a poisonous, corrosive man from entering our country, they will act in good conscience. But this is not just any man that we're talking about. This is a man who is extremely high profile, involved in the American show business industry for years and years, a man who is interviewing for the most important job in the world. His words are not comical. His words are not funny. His words are poisonous. They risk inflaming tension between vulnerable communities. And let me make one thing clear. We have legislation in our country to make sure we do not let people enter who are not conducive to the public good. And the honourable member for Newport West has outlined some of the people who have been banned by the Home Office for entering this country. I looked up some of the rhetoric. Yes.
You're not talking about. You're talking about a candidate for the presidency of the United States. Isn't it up for the American people to decide whether his views are objectionable, not you guys?
The honourable gentleman has been in the House long enough to know that he has to address through the chair, and I have no view on this whatsoever, as the honourable gentleman will appreciate.
I think the question has been answered for the honourable gentleman. I think the question has been answered for the honourable gentleman. So I looked up the cases which have 84 hate preachers who have not been allowed into the country. And I just wanted to highlight the case of one female blogger, who I won't be naming, but you're welcome to look it up. I had a look at the rhetoric that was used by this female blogger, and she was banned from entering our country. Her crime was that she equated the entire Muslim population with the views of a handful of extremists. And the Home Office spokesperson banned her from coming into our country and said, and I quote, "She is not allowed into the country because we condemn all those whose behaviours and views run counter to our shared values and will not stand for extremism in any form." The views of this female blogger who was stopped from coming to the country and Donald Trump's views that Muslims are all the same are strikingly similar and have very similar resemblance in the words that they use. If legislation is in the country, should it be applied equally to everyone, or are we going to be making exceptions for billionaire politicians, even when their words are clearly falling short of the Home Office guidance? Yes, of course.
She doesn't want there to be any exceptions. I've heard the remarks that Donald Trump's made by a large number of my constituents. She may disagree with them, but lots of my constituents would agree with what Donald Trump said, whether I like that or not. Does she think that they should be expelled from the country as a result of their views? And if not, what's the difference?
I'm afraid the honourable member should think carefully about what he's just said. It's not the same as us making a decision not to let people into the country whose views are falling short of the Home Office guidance. The honourable member for Newport West has already outlined some of the other views that Donald Trump has, whether that's views on Mexicans, whether that's views on black people. It was Donald Trump, don't forget, who ran a dog whistle campaign against Barack Obama's birth certificate to find out whether the President of America was really American. Can you imagine, in the Mother of Parliaments, if my colleagues decided to question ethnic minority MPs about whether they were really British? And let me tell you, yes.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Is she aware that also some of the things that people find repellent about this individual is he's not only racist, but he is homophobic and misogynistic as well?
I thank the honourable member for her intervention, and I'd like to read out what Donald Trump said when asked by Megan Stiles on Fox News. She asked him to explain why he called some women fat pigs, slobs, dogs, and disgusting animals. And Donald Trump replied, "What I say is what I say." Is this the kind of man that we want in our country? The other question I wanted to ask is that I thoroughly anticipate the rebuttal that we cannot exclude people because they merely offend us or because we do not like them. But as politicians, we have to make very difficult decisions. And one of the decisions we have to make is when freedom of speech actually insults public safety, when we are worried about the safety of our constituents. And what the evidence I want to point to is the Centre for Hate and Extremism has pointed out that anti-Muslim hate crimes has increased in line with the rhetoric that Donald Trump has been using in the last 3 months of 2015. And the honourable member for Newport West pointed out about the incident of the Hispanic man who was beaten up by two brothers from South Boston. When they beat this homeless man up, they broke his nose, they urinated on him, and the police report said that he justified it by saying, after I finish my point, justified it by saying, Donald Trump was right, we should get rid of all of these illegals. My point is that hate crime is being inflamed and stroked by the words that Donald Trump is using I will give way.
I'm very interested, thank the honourable member for giving way, and very interesting the point that she seems to be making. To make sure I've understood it correctly, are you laying all of the responsibility for the increase in hate crime against Muslims at the door of Donald Trump? Do you not believe that some of it may have been contributed to by the acts of terrorism, such as in Paris?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and of course I would not be laying all the blame of the increase in hate crimes at the door of Donald Trump, but there is a very real correlation between the words that Donald Trump is using and the increase in hate crime, which is the point that I'm trying to make, that a lot of his words means that there is real crime and real violence, and that's where I draw the line at freedom of speech. I'll give way.
Lady. Many things incite violence, and I don't mean to undermine her debate. For example, parliamentary regulations that we pass incite violence. Policemen are attacked and in one case had his head chopped off. That doesn't mean to say that we should shut down debate. I'm afraid all kinds of things incite violence, often, and well, always, by totally irresponsible people.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I don't have much time left, so I will just wrap up by saying I draw the line at freedom of speech when it actually imports violent ideology, which is what I feel is happening. The legislation in place is to protect the public and protect the people of Britain from individuals such as this. If legislation has been practiced before and other people have been stopped from coming into the country, the same rules need to apply to Donald Trump, which is why I feel he shouldn't be given a visa to come and visit the multicultural country that we are so proud of. Thank you.
Sir Edward Lee.
Yes. Widely quoted this morning, I think, the Dave Craroff saying she was going to trash Donald Trump this afternoon. Well, I'm not sure that he's going to be terribly worried about this debate. I do respect the honourable member, my friend, the member for Newport West, for the measured way in which he introduced this debate. May I just say that, naturally, it's no surprise when I say I oppose this ban. I think it just gives Donald Trump publicity. Actually, it's the only item in the US press about British politics at the moment, this debate, which we're sitting in. They're not talking about Corbyn mania or Brexit or anything else. They're talking about this. So, you know, why feed this machine? We saw what happened with Geert Wilders. Did that do any good? I don't think it did. The honourable member for Newport West made this point in his measured speech. Secondly, of course, it offends free speech. And actually, in a free country, you have the right to offend people. And I introduced an amendment to Clause 5 of the Public Order Act, making that quite clear. I offend people in this House all the time, and that's my perfect right to do. The third point is, of course, the United States is a friendly country. Twice in 2 world wars it's come to our rescue. This man may conceivably become president of our most important ally. Fourthly, you can't translate American politics to UK politics, which is completely different. I mean, I was doing a debate earlier this year on full fiscal autonomy for Scotland, and the Labour spokesman described me as an extreme right-winger, God forbid. Although my amendment had been supported by John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, who's a backbencher. No, whether he's an extreme right-winger, I don't know. But as it happens, I'm strongly in favour of gun control. I voted consistently against bombing Syria and invading Iraq. I'm strongly in favour of the NHS, which I use exclusively, and I'm opposed to capital punishment. Would I survive in the Republican Party? Although I'm told I'm an extreme right-winger. So our politics is completely different, and it's a great mistake to try and translate it. So petitions like this, they're good, they're a bit of good fun, but if, God forbid, the government was to act on it, would only play into Mr. Trump's hands. His entire style of politics is to stoke controversy and say outrageous things, lavishing with attention, even if our intent is to condemn or deride, is only falling into the trap he has set for us. His continuing popularity amongst voters is evidence of this. And he is popular with many voters. We may not like it, but he is. I think we must be wary of lowering ourselves to demagoguery in fighting demagogues. We all lament the divisiveness of politics, which, viewed from afar, from our side of the pond, seems particularly divisive in the United States. Does a debate like this really help, or banning him even worse? We oppose Mr. Trump for demonising his opponents. Most of us in this room oppose us oppose him for demonising his opponents. If we ban him from the country, are we not in danger of doing the same? Like it or not, he is also quite a contender to be the head of state of what is arguably the most powerful country in the planet, a country which is a vital ally of us. Now, we've welcomed to this country Saudi and Chinese leaders, not to mention Mr. Ceausescu, whose crimes are far, far worse than anything Mr. Trump can dream up. These are people who actually don't just talk about violence, they practice violence on an extreme scale, and we have welcomed them to our country. I'm a firm believer in free speech. It's a cause I have combined with such unlikely bedfellows as the National Secular Society and the Christian Institute. If we only allow free speech for those we already agree with, is that free speech at all? Dialogue is a solution and not deeper division. And let me end by saying that this is also an attempt to shut down an honest debate about immigration. As soon as you talk about immigration, you are labelled as a right-winger, as a racist. That is not the way to solve this problem of integration. And it was a fantastic article the Prime Minister wrote in the Times today, making the worthwhile and good point that our Muslim friends have to learn from previous waves of successful immigrants, particularly the Jews in the 19th century and others who have chosen to integrate fully in our society. And here are some of the prominent immigrants and children of immigrants, all intensely identifiably British, all of whom arrived long before Britain's present post-war immigration waves. Hans Holbein, George Frederick Handel, Frederick William Herschel, Isaac and Benjamin Disraeli, Christina Rossetti, Gustav Holst, Augustus Pugin, Louis of Battenberg and his son Louis Mountbatten, Hilaire Belloc, Joseph Conrad, George Louis du Maurier, Winston Churchill, Leo Amery, T.S. Eliot, Louis Namier, Larry Constantine, Alexander Korda, Michael Pressburger, Nicholas Pevsner, Isaiah Berlin, Geoffrey Elton, the two Michael Howards, Solly Zuckerman. This list, and this is the final point I make, this list illuminates a fundamental point. Although these figures immensely enhanced British life, they did not make their adopted nation cosmopolitan. Their adopted nation made these cosmopolitans British, and we should be proud of them.
Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Sir Roger, and I do appreciate the opportunity to contribute so early in this debate. Sir Roger, whenever I was considering my remarks for this debate, I thought I would be in conflict with the Honourable Member for Newport West, but I'm pleased to say that's not the case. But for both he and the Honourable Member for Sutton and Cheam, I do want to make one point about exclusion for the Petitions Committee, because when I log on as a Northern Ireland member and try to access their online map, Northern Ireland, of course, doesn't exist. And if there is an issue of exclusion, I hope that is one that can be addressed when you sort out the licensing with Ordnance Survey. I'm also quite concerned, apprehensive, Sir Roger, that the Right Honourable Member for Chelmsford is in the chamber today as the chief parliamentary proponent for Hillary. I wonder if there will be an intervention made to the detriment of Donald Trump. I never thought I would say it, but I agree wholeheartedly with that dreadful right-winger, the Right Honourable Member for Gainsborough. He is right, Sir Roger. And I do have to say that in this debate it is important that we consider the principles of democracy, the principles of firm and thorough debate, and the fact that when you have a strong and a good principled position, we should stand robustly by it, not run from it or fear the opposition or the country arguments that others may make, be they in this country or from afar. And members of this Westminster Hall present today will know of Linton Crosby, the political advisor, analyst, and he talks about the dead cat on the table theory. And the idea of that theory is if you're losing the argument or if you're not getting referred to at all, throw a dead cat on the table and people will notice. They will stop and you will change the direction of political discourse and debate. And of course, that's exactly what Donald Trump is doing. It's not just once or a one-off initiative. It's something that marks his campaign entirely. He throws a dead cat on the table and people stop considering what they were considering, stop doing what they were doing, and listen to him and take him seriously. Now, I think there will be those today, and there has been one member already, the Honourable Member for Hampstead and Kilburn, who will support the exclusion of Donald Trump. And while some of those contributions today won't make that argument, I want to see Donald Trump come to this country and either be grilled by members of Parliament or grilled by Andrew Neil or grilled by those great interrogators we have within the public discourse in this country. I want them to challenge him. I want him to get a sense of the fury and the frustration with his xenophobic remarks. Let him leave this country feeling that actually there are better principles than what he has politically outlined so far. We should be proud of our values as a country and proud of the values that we would like to see placed throughout the world. So confront him, challenge him and confound him into recognising that what he has outlined may get you the headlines. It may change the nature of political discourse in the United States or across the world, but it's bad policy, and it would change the nature and the image and the reputation of the United States irrevocably from those founding fathers and those individuals who have built up so much over the last 3 centuries. Turning to the debate we have had, I think it's important, Sir Roger, that I do reflect today that we have a leader of the opposition who is indicating that it would be appropriate to open back channels with Daesh. Back channels with Daesh, yet we have members of the same party today saying we should exclude somebody who politically has erred, but who is not a terrorist. Back channels with Daesh for what? To reasonably negotiate with somebody who will consider that negotiation in the context of whether they murder your wife or they rape her first before they cut off their head? That's the same leader of the opposition, the same shadow chancellor within this Parliament today who gave succour to terrorists in our United Kingdom over the last 30 years, who supported the IRA, murdering citizens in Northern Ireland and murdering our countrymen within this country. To put into context what it is we're being asked to believe from the Honourable Member of Hampstead, that it would be appropriate to ban somebody who has erred in political ideology, but hasn't erred in law, hasn't promoted terrorism, hasn't promoted extremism to the extent that we lose life, that we damage and we destroy communities. Well, I will, of course.
Does the Honourable Member think legislation in the country should be applied equally to everyone?
I do think it does, but what I am doing is setting clear blue water between the support that has been given by her honourable leader in years gone by in this country for terrorists who have destroyed, maimed and killed, and somebody who is a ridiculous xenophobe, but somebody that we don't need to promote any further, Sir Roger. That is the point that I wish to make. And for those who I believe will take a hypocritical stance, those north of the border from where we now sit, but still very much part of our United Kingdom, those who lauded, those who applauded Donald Trump, those who invited him to the country, appointed him as an ambassador, and regaled him with all the civic support and adoration they could because of brass tacks. That's the same. Of course I will. Of course I will.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very obliged to you for giving away. Is the Honourable Member's suggestion that if somebody had a crystal ball and we could predict that this individual could conceivably make the comments he's made condemning an entire religion?
Sir Roger, I'm very grateful for the intervention, and I'll say this. If I ever criticise someone or some party or something in this chamber, I will always give a right to respond. But I have to say, Sir Roger, you didn't need a crystal ball. And it has been referred to already, the ridiculous involvement Donald Trump had in the birther scandal around Barack Obama's lineage. Was he born in Hawaii or was he born in Kenya? Was he a Christian or was he a Muslim? That wasn't 9 months ago. That was in 2008 and 9. You didn't need a crystal ball. You just needed to know who you were working with. 25 years ago, Sir Roger, when his wife divorced him, she took the opportunity to say her much-loved former husband used to lie in bed at night and read the works of Adolf Hitler. So you don't need a crystal ball to recognise that the person you're dealing with, maybe a successful businessman, is also a buffoon and has the dangerous capability of saying the most obscene or insensitive things to attract attention. None of that should be new, Sir Roger, but yet I don't think we will avoid the hypocrisy around it. Sir Roger, I've been given additional minutes, it seems, with interventions. I am grateful for the time, but as a party and as an individual, I could not support the exclusion of Donald Trump from this country. Yeah. Bring him here. Let us have the opportunity to challenge him and let him go home with his tail between his legs and recognise that the principles he espoused no longer reflect this country, the United States of America, or the aspirations that we should all seek to promote internationally.
Yeah. Tugendhat.
Sir Roger, it's a great pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. For me, I find myself standing here and for the first time, I think, ever agreeing wholeheartedly with the Honourable Member for Newport West. I think none of us are quite as surprised about that as I am, but I am even more surprised to hear the Honourable Member quoting warmly the words of President Bush. Admittedly, it was President Bush father and not son. Today is also one of the moments in this year when we will mark the anniversary, 500 years since St. Thomas More, who was tried and then executed not so far from this place, wrote the book Utopia, in which he envisioned a new future and a new ideal. He wrote it expressing in his heart the liberties of thought and faith that he hoped that what he called Englishmen then, and I think what Mr. Hannan would now refer to as the Anglosphere, would express across the globe. And yet today, a report has come out showing that the liberties he hoped for, the liberties he desired, are actually in trouble. An online journal called Spiked has gone around various universities and found that freedom of speech is being challenged. So-called safe spaces in our colleges, also could be known as spaces of censorship, now cover some 39% of universities. This is not just a threat to freedom of thought in those universities. As I see this debate covered by many of our friends from the Third Estate, it is worth remembering that they too are part of the Fourth Estate, forgive me. It is worth remembering that they too are part of the democratic process. And though we, who stand here and speak in the chamber, may sometimes not like it, their role in holding us to account is equally as important as ours in speaking the truth. And so it is with that cry of freedom and that cry of liberty that I speak in favour of considering, but in favour of rejecting this motion. Because liberty is not something we can take in portion or in part. It comes as one and it comes as a whole. And as the First Amendment of the US Constitution makes clear, that freedom of expression is essential for a free people. And that is why, although I may not like it, and although I can be absolutely sure that I wouldn't support it, it is no place of me or this House to criticise a man running for an elected office in a foreign country. We may not wish him here, we may not like him here, but we should not vote against his ability to speak or indeed criticise his right to travel, when we too value those same rights of liberty. Are you looking to intervene? Or yes.
I just wanted to be clear, did the Honourable Member actually say it's not our place to criticise? Because that surely would be a curtailment of freedom of speech for those of us who are opposed to what he said. I'm pretty sure what he said was we do not have the right to criticise.
You're quite right. We have the right to criticise, but we do not have the right to... I do not think that we have the right to prevent somebody who has campaigned for elected office... Sorry, the Honourable Lady is quite right. Although we have the right to criticise, we should not exercise that on people who are running for elected offices in foreign countries. I believe it is for the American people to judge him. I believe it is for the American people to hold him to account. It is not, I would argue, it is bad politics and it is bad judgment to intervene in the electoral processes of other countries, and I would wish to do it as little as possible. I will give way.
Based on what the Honourable Member is saying, the mayoral candidate from the Labour Party, the Honourable Member for Tooting, is of Muslim origin, and under Donald Trump would not be allowed to travel to America. Does the Honourable Member want to comment on that?
I'd be delighted to, on the grounds that I think the United States Constitution makes wonderful provision for the balance of powers, and that her failure to understand that the President of the United States is not a sovereign and not a despot, but is balanced by the Congress and by the courts, is a failure to understand why the United States, despite, let's face it, having one or two incumbents of the White House who may not have been Mensa candidates, the country has yet succeeded all the way through to today as a bastion of liberty and economic success. Now, today, as we consider also Martin Luther King Day, it is worth remembering that he too relied on these rights of freedom. He too relied on these rights when he was campaigning to desegregate the University of Alabama, and when those students bravely marched in on the 11th of June in '63. The prevailing opinion was that they should shut up. The prevailing opinion was that their rights of freedom of speech should be curtailed. Now, while I think this man is crazy, while I think this man has no valid points to make, I will not be the one to silence his voice. So when I think now about what more we should do, I say we should stand aside and we should wait for an American to come forward, as the great Joe Welsh did, Chief Counsel of the United States Army, when he looked at Senator McCarthy in the '54 trials and he said, "Have you no shame, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?" Because if somebody will say that to Trump, surely that is better than for us to legislate on the freedom of expression and the freedom of travel of a citizen of that great country, the United States.
Naz Shah.
Congratulate my friend for leading this debate. I'm going to start by quoting Martin Luther King, because I think Martin Luther King deserves much more recognition today than does Donald Trump. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. So therefore, I do welcome this discussion. I am very grateful for the petitioners who have wanted us to raise our voice and have this debate. There are two things I'd like to share with you. I had lunch earlier on with a very interesting lunch with there were a number of people, including Rick Stengel, the Under-Secretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. And the conversations when we talked about how to get back to this Donald Trump debate was we agreed that actually Donald Trump is no more than a demagogue. He panders to people's fears as opposed to their strengths. And I should know, because I know that I helped, people of Bradford West helped me get rid of one in Bradford West this election. So we have, it's not the first time I've dealt with a demagogue. And, there are two things I'd like to really point out. For me, whilst I really, really value this debate, and whilst I really, really accept that this is a very emotive subject, and I understand and I respect the views of my colleagues who say we should ban this person from inciting hatred, I agree. However, what I would also say is that I, as a Member of Parliament for Bradford West, would give an open invitation to Donald Trump to visit my constituency. And the reason I'd give him an open invitation to visit my constituency, I'd take him to the synagogue, I'd take him to the church, I'd take him to the mosque, I'd invite him for a curry. We are curry capital of Britain. I would welcome him and I would have a conversation with him and challenge him on his views. And I would show him, when I've made my point, I would show him that actually I would invite him to feed the homeless with the In Touch Foundation, a Muslim charity who feeds homeless people in the city of Bradford. I would invite him to meet with the volunteers who helped out in my fellow colleagues' constituency, the Human Appeal Foundation, Muslim volunteers, and those people that work together in the issues which affect us as a country, which affected us as people, regardless of our race, regardless of our gender or ethnicity and our religion. That's what I'd show to him. What I would also... I give way.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way. I'm a little bit confused. She said that she agreed with the ban, but at the same time she wanted to invite him to her constituency.
Sorry.
I don't see how this
Thank you for your intervention. I respect the views of my colleagues. I do not agree to an overall ban. I don't. I would quite clearly invite Donald Trump to Bradford West. I think the curries are better in Bradford West as well. But there you go. So there's an issue for me about actually challenging that narrative. And I think it's important for us, in the name of democracy, to challenge that narrative, to challenge that hatred speech that comes out of his mouth. I would also, by the very same token, I stand here as a Muslim woman, as a proud British Muslim woman. And what I would say, and what I would say to, Donald Trump would like me banned from America. I wouldn't get my visa. But you know what? In my Islam, and the Quran that I understand, in Surah 41 of verse 34, what it teaches me, and this isn't word for word, this is what I take from my Quran, is that goodness is better than evil. If someone does bad, you do good in return. So I will not allow the rhetoric of badness into my life, into my heart, or for that of my constituents. In return, what I will do is challenge that with goodness, because hatred breeds hate, and that is not something that I would tolerate. And on a final point, given that it is Martin Luther King Day, I would leave everybody with this quote. I have decided, in his words, I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. Thank you.
Gloria Atkins.
Sir Roger, thank you for, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Sir Roger, I must make a declaration. I am the only Member of Parliament who can claim to represent the good people of New York. New York in Lincolnshire. When those seeking religious sanctuary in the 1600s reached the shores of what we now know as the United States of America, this tiny hamlet in my constituency lent its name to a patch of land that grew to be one of the greatest cities on the planet. The good people of New York, the original New York, wear that honour lightly, all 150 people or so of them.
Will my honourable friend allow it?
Yes.
Ted Cruz has launched a vicious attack on the people of New York, saying they are cosmopolitan. So I hope she will stand up for the people of New York. And will she know that actually, I've looked at the map, and not a single person from Lincolnshire has actually signed this petition to ban Donald Trump.
Well, Sir Edward, you are reaching my point before I am. I promise you I'm going to deal with New York values at the end of my speech. But turning, as I must, to Mr. Trump, his comments regarding Muslims are wrong. His policy to close borders, if he is elected as president, is bonkers. And if he met one or two of my constituents in one of the many excellent pubs in my constituency, then they may well tell him that he is a wazzock for dealing with this issue in this way. Because I sense that my constituents in New York or in Tetney, in Minting or in Mablethorpe, feel that their values are more than robust enough to survive anything that Mr. Trump may say. And that we in Lincolnshire, no, in fact, we in the United Kingdom should have enough confidence in our values to allow him to say whatever he wants in New York, in New York, Lincolnshire, or anywhere else in the world. Because our British values are stronger than some amongst us here today appear to fear. With pleasure.
Does the honourable member understand that it's all very well for us to say, well, we feel strong and we can withstand this, and you can criticise and you can offend and we'll stand up to you. But we, her and I, are not Muslims living in a country where there is already a rise in Islamophobia. And comments like that from somebody who has such influence over so many people and is getting so much media exposure over it can only harm people, not like us, people living out there on the street feeling vulnerable, not feeling as strong as she and her constituents are claiming to feel.
I can only give the honourable member the reassurance that as someone who used to prosecute criminals for a living before I came to this place, any defendant who tried that on in court would get very short shrift from me, and I'm sure from the jury. And the point is that we mustn't allow people who behave in that disgraceful way, we mustn't allow such criminals, people who beat up other people on the basis of their religion or their beliefs, we mustn't allow them to somehow remove themselves from that by blaming someone in a different continent. If they beat a Muslim up on the streets of Britain, that is their responsibility and no one else's. Now, one of the values I think that best sums up our country, of course, includes the freedom to exchange thoughts and ideas within the law. The freedom to persuade or to rebut. The freedom to inspire or to eviscerate in argument. The freedom to speak and the freedom to listen. Now, this freedom is not always comfortable. Indeed, my honourable friends for South Dorset and Tunbridge and Morling have already referred to the rising problem, it seems, of some of our universities fearing to allow free speech, providing safe spaces for fear that people may be offended. But the freedom of speech must mean that sometimes we are going to be offended. It means allowing those whose views we hold to be unedifying to speak their minds. And it also, crucially, means the freedom to reply, to say, no, Donald Trump, you are wrong, and you are wrong for the following reasons. That freedom was hard-won over centuries and must be defended jealously, because it goes to the very essence of democracy and the rule of law. Now, members opposite may rely on the argument of consistency. Indeed, one member already has, saying, well, so-and-so's been excluded and so Mr. Trump must be excluded. Well, let us remind ourselves about the threshold that must be met for this to happen. The Home Secretary must conclude that the person's presence in the United Kingdom is not conducive to the public good. The House of Commons Library very helpfully provided a briefing note for this debate, and in which it provides 14 examples of people who had been excluded by Labour Home Secretaries by May 2009. Of those 14 examples, 10 were considered to be engaging in unacceptable behaviour by seeking to foment, justify or glorify terrorist violence. 9 were considered to be engaging in unacceptable behaviour in order to provoke others to commit terrorist act or serious crime. 5 were considering to be fostering hatred, which might lead to inter-community violence in the UK. And 1 had spent 30 years in prison for killing 4 soldiers and a 4-year-old girl. I ask a simple question of those who would ban Donald Trump. Are you really saying that his conduct, no matter how offensive, that his conduct meets this same criteria? I won't, thank you, I'll move on. If, and it is a big if Donald Trump poses any question for us as a country, the answer is not to fuel his publicity by banning him, which, incidentally, this debate is already doing nicely. The answer is to rebut his arguments. I'll finish my point then. The answer is to challenge him in a robust democratic argument about why he is wrong about the contribution of American and British Muslims to this country. I'll give way.
I know the Honourable Member cites 14 cases of people who were banned. Has the Honourable Member considered the 84 hate preachers in total who were banned? Because the Honourable Member would see that there is a striking resemblance between what Donald Trump is saying and 2 of the bloggers who were banned 2 years ago by the Conservative Home Secretary. And will the Honourable Member comment on whether the same should be applied to Donald Trump?
Well, no, forgive me. I have already given the House of Commons briefing note, as I think most people accept, is a neutral document. Those are their examples. I have used every single one of the 14 examples given. And as I say, they are in a very, very different category from the category of Donald Trump saying, as he has done, on this issue and on many others. But I'll deal, if I may, finally, with the point that Sir Edward, my honourable friend and neighbour, raised. Ted Cruz, in the recent Republican debate, accusing Donald Trump of having New York values. Well, I can assure both of them that they would be enriched by the values of my constituents in New York and beyond, who are hard-working, generous and welcoming, and who may well be rather bemused that we are fuelling this man's publicity machine by having this debate at all today. Thank you, Sir Roger.
Azmina Ahmed Sheikh.
Thank you, Sir Roger. It's a pleasure indeed to serve under your chairmanship. Donald Trump's comments that he would ban Muslim men, women and children from entering the USA if he were to be elected as president were almost universally condemned as racist and offensive. And I absolutely welcome the condemnation that his statement has received from all sides of the House and indeed both sides of this debate, and that members of the public have decided that this issue is serious and merits parliamentary scrutiny in relation to the debate that we're having today. Mr Trump's announcement into subsequent remarks condemn a whole religion for the actions of a terrorist death cult. Mr Trump also condemns and speaks in derogatory terms, I should say, women, people with disabilities, Mexicans. The list is non-exhaustive because it is never ending. And Donald Trump is not just wrong. His comments are indeed dangerous and his views must be tackled seriously. Donald Trump's words confirm... Yes, of course.
Thank you, Sir Roger. Does the Honourable Lady not think that Mr Trump might well be making these comments, not only because he thinks they're true, but because he wants to get lots of publicity to help his election campaign?
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. I don't think it is for me or us to try and get into the mind of Donald Trump, but I think it would be very important if members here would understand what it's like to be a Muslim living in this country when we're facing comments made by people like Mr Trump, where people take on board what he's saying as being genuine concerns about the whole of those of us who practice the Muslim faith. It's a very uncomfortable place to be in, and I would hope that the member would accept my personal experience in that respect. Mr Trump condemns my family. The ridiculous situation he has created means that in similar vein, he condemns the political editor of Sky News, the chief executive of Tate & Lyle, and some of our greatest Olympians. He condemns the leaders of Bahrain, UAE and Jordan for the actions of those terrorists they are currently working together to overcome in Iraq and Syria. Because, Mr Chairman, we are all Muslims. That, for him, is the one and only common denominator. And rather than combating the serious issue of international terrorism, Trump's statement has bolstered the twisted narrative promoted by the terrorist cult Daesh and others that pits the West against the Muslim faith. He's fuelled racial tensions across the world while undermining the national security of both the US and the UK, and indeed, in the words of the Pentagon spokesman Peter Cook, who said at the time that that statement was made by Mr Trump, anything that bolsters ISIL's narrative and pits the United States against the Muslim faith is certainly not only contrary to our values, but contrary to our national security. As he threatens, Mr Chairman, the national security of our friends in the USA, he threatens too our own security. Since her appointment as Home Secretary in 2010, Theresa May has already banned hundreds of individuals from the UK. Her job, quite correctly, is to protect public safety and promote our security. She has already explicitly excluded 84 people for hate speech. Under her judgment, my view is that Donald Trump should be number 85. Using the powers vested in her, Theresa May has excluded people who have included serious criminals, far-right extremists, homophobic extremists, and these rules should be applied consistently and equally to all, because if they exist for that very reason, and we have a responsibility for peace and security to ensure that whoever comes in and out of our country is treated in the same way. Now, I am very, very proud that the Scottish Government has taken a lead and removed Trump's status as a Global Scot ambassador. And in terms of questions of hypocrisy, perhaps it's an important forum for me today to confirm that his Global Scot ambassador state was bestowed upon him by a former Labour administration. Let that myth be dispelled here and now. But the same thing would apply. I don't think anyone, any genuine person, could possibly have envisaged that this man would make such horrendous comments. The UK government now need to demonstrate their commitment to promoting religious harmony by applying their own rules consistently in this case. Now, I understand the argument being made by some that we should educate Mr Trump, we should invite him here so he can see for himself how to build bridges with the Muslim community rather than putting up barriers. This is a man who seeks to be President of the United States of America, and we think we need to educate him. We should be very worried if a man lacking in such education seeks to lead a nation. Absolutely. I just want to finish my sentence. Of course.
Making a powerful speech, but can I not suggest that actually this is about buffoonery, and ultimately buffoonery should not be met with the blunt instrument of a ban, but with the classic British response of ridicule?
I thank the member for his intervention, and it is within the gift of the British state about which he speaks to deal with Mr Trump in the same manner as we've dealt with other people. And I accept that you have referred to Mr Trump's buffoonery, but I have to say that his remarks are condemning an entire religion of faith which I practice. And it may be difficult for people to understand how that affects us, but it does, because he's talking about me, he's talking about my family, he's talking about my children. That is what Mr Trump's talking about. It is worthy of note, however, that Mr Trump's policy would make it impossible for me or other Muslim friends of America to travel to his country to make the same case there that we are making here. This Parliament can be extremely proud of its improving record in electing strong Muslim MPs across this House to represent their constituents' interests. But Mr Trump would ban the new members for Ealing, Central and Acton, Hampstead and Kilburn, Wealdon, Bradford West and Bradford East from entering the USA and allowing us to make our case there. I've heard others say that it would only add to Mr Trump's notoriety to apply our rules consistently in his case. It would raise his profile. Now, anyone who's followed the race for the Republican nomination for president will know that lack of profile is not an issue for Mr Trump. The American people have a very important decision to make this year about who they want to lead their country, and I am sure they will make the right choice, and it is their decision to make. Mr Chairman, last week, Mr Trump added insult to injury by stating he will withdraw his investment in 2 Scottish golf courses if he's subject to the same type of travel restrictions he advocates for others. However, contrary to his own assertions, Mr Trump is bad for business. It's already clear that the Royal and Ancient will not include Turnberry on the open rota while still owned by Trump, costing the local economy dearly, while his work to actively undermine a vital offshore renewables investment in the North Sea may have serious repercussions in developing Scotland as a world leader in this emerging technology. Donald Trump has provided succour to terrorists and promoted racial hatred on both sides of the Atlantic. He has, of course, a right to be wrong, but his statements are dangerous and threaten our public safety and national security. We cannot have laws which are applied differently depending on people's income, public profile, religion or colour. What does that say about us? Our rules and laws must be applied consistently for all. The Home Secretary needs to apply her own judgment consistently in this case, and that is what I am calling upon her to do, and looking forward to hearing from the Minister in his response. Mr Chairman, anything else would be unprincipled and quite simply wrong.
Steve Double.
Thank you, Sir Roger. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and to participate in this debate. I'm also a member of the Petitions Committee, and I'm delighted that we brought this debate to the House today, not because we, as a committee, held a particular view, but we just felt, with the number of people that had signed the petition, it was right to air these very important issues. I'm sure, like the hundreds of thousands of people who signed this petition, and no doubt millions of others across the country, I condemn wholeheartedly the comments made by Mr Trump, not only about Muslims, but also about Mexicans, about women, about people with disabilities, and about other minority groups. However, the question as to whether or not we should ban him from this country is a very interesting and a very important question, and one that we need to address and consider head-on. This country has a long and strong tradition of free speech. And although, sadly, I believe that principle has been eroded, and some of those freedoms have been eroded in recent times, I still believe that we are a country that welcomes debate and embraces a variety of views within our country. If we were to go down the road of banning Mr Trump because we find his views objectionable or even offensive, where would we draw the line? There are many people who have equally intolerant views. Those who come to this country, those who have already heard, some who live in this country already. Are we to ban them because we don't like the things they say or we disagree with them? The issue at stake here is how our society handles people who have different views than us, even when we find those views strongly objectionable or offensive. The issue of free speech. And I believe it is about when someone crosses a line to incite others to acts of violence, to criminal acts. That is the line that I believe is to be drawn, and that where we differentiate. And I personally don't believe that Donald Trump has crossed that line. He may do it another time, and then maybe we would need to reconsider our views. But as of yet, I don't believe that he has done that. It's perfectly right that the Home Secretary bans extremist preachers when they tell their followers to commit acts of terrorism, to cause harm, hate, to cause pain, and ultimately kill other individuals or community. That's absolutely right that the Home Secretary does that. But I don't believe Mr. Trump has done that. If we did, as a country, start to ban people because they said things we didn't like, I wonder how long the list would be. As ignorant, as unpleasant as Donald Trump's comments are, he is not alone. For starters, we'd have to ban the current Prime Minister of Hungary, because he has said, I believe, things equally offensive about Muslims. Mr. Chairman, the way we deal with bigotry and prejudice is by confronting it head-on, not by trying to avoid it. Banning someone like Donald Trump would risk making him a martyr. I believe we would only fuel his course even further, and in his own mind he would see himself as a martyr, and I believe many of his supporters would feel the same. And what would it achieve, banning him? We live in a global village now. We're not going to stop his views reaching our shores purely because we ban him. In fact, I would argue the opposite. Actually, the promotion a ban would bring would mean that his words and his views are heard louder and stronger than they currently are. Banning him would only play into his hands. So instead of banning Mr. Trump, I'm with those who say, let's invite him to this country. Let's bring him here and confront his views head on. Let's take him and show him what a great nation we are, based on those values of tolerance and freedom of speech. Let's take him to the places that he has spoken about and show him what life in Britain is really like. The final point I want to make, Mr. Chairman, is that I'm actually been surprised at the amount of support that Mr. Trump has received from his own Republican Party. Because it was Ronald Reagan who actually, certainly in my lifetime, was, in my view, the greatest Republican president that the United States have had. Who, far from proposing building walls, was actually all about tearing down walls. It was he who said to President Gorbachev of Russia, if you seek liberalisation, come here to this gate, Mr. Gorbachev. Open this gate and tear down this wall. And therefore I am surprised that he's getting the amount of support he is, because it seems to cut right against the heritage and the values that I understand the Republican Party are about. Of course I will. Thank you.
I'm not surprised at all. The fact is that in America and in Britain, there is widespread disillusion with mainstream establishment politicians who don't seem to give an honest answer to people's concerns over immigration and many issues. And therefore, there's no point just bad-mouthing this guy. We have to take on these arguments and discuss them in an open way.
Thank you. Thank the Honourable Member for that intervention. I agree with him, absolutely, that the response we're seeing is actually far more about people's frustrations and concerns than it is, I believe, about one individual man. And so, in conclusion, I believe it would be ironic if we were to take the regressive stance of banning Donald Trump because he has called for a ban on Muslims into the United States. I find that entirely ironic, that we would surely be guilty of the same thing that we are criticising him for. It would send a signal to the world that we are scared. Of course, go on.
The difference between what Donald Trump has said and what we're saying, we are, well, not we, but members on this side are calling for Donald Trump to be banned because of something very dangerous that he said. He is calling for Muslims to be registered and tracked for no reason, because they've done absolutely nothing wrong. There is a huge difference.
Well, I respect the view of the Honourable Member. I personally take a different view, that to ban him would simply be playing into the same fears that he is promoting. It's often been said that two wrongs don't make a right. Well, I want to say that two bans don't make a right.
Jack Dromey.
Mr. Chairman, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. America is a great country, the land of the free, one of our oldest allies. Donald Trump is a fool. He is free to be a fool. He is not free to be a dangerous fool on our shores. Now, some of the foolish things that Donald Trump has said. The concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make US manufacturing non-competitive. It's freezing and snowing in New York. We need global warming. He, John McCain's not a war hero. He's a war hero because he has captured. I like people that weren't captured. Okay, I hate to tell you. He then went on to the offensive. He said, I would build a great wall, this is in relation to Mexico, and nobody builds walls better than me. Believe me. And I'll build them very inexpensively. I will build a great wall on our southern border, and I will have Mexico pay for that wall. Mark my words. Now, I will.
The honourable member makes an excellent case as to why Donald Trump is a buffoon, not a criminal, a buffoon.
Those remarks are daft and offensive. I would defend people's right to be daft and offensive. I was chairman of the National Council for Civil Liberties, now Liberty, and I fought to defend freedom of speech throughout my life. But freedom of speech is not an absolute. Neither is there an absolute right for Donald Trump or anyone else to come to our shores. Successive governments have acted to exclude the preachers of hate whose presence would not be conducive to the public good. Preachers of hate, the effect of whose actions and words would be to incite violence, have no right to come to Britain. And if I can give some examples of the kind of people that have been banned. Michael Savage, US radio host, he said, it was said about him, he was considered to be engaging in an unacceptable behaviour, fostering hatred. He claimed American Muslims needed deportation. He was banned from coming to our country. Yunus al-Astal, Hamas MP and preacher, again found to be guilty of unacceptable behaviour. He'd made a series of anti-Semitic remarks, banned from coming to our country. Pamela Geller and Robert Spencer, founders of the Stop Islamization of America and the American Freedom Defense Initiative, were banned in 2013 by the current Secretary of State for the Home Office when they were due to speak at an EDL rally held on the location of Lee Rigby's murder, as their arrival would not be deemed to be conducive to the public good. And one other example, Savwat Hegazi, an Egyptian television preacher who was, in a quote, the words of the Home Office, considered to be engaging in unacceptable behaviour by glorifying terrorist violence. He had called for violence against Jews. Now, first of all, what has Donald Trump actually said? Of course, legendarily about the total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. He then went on to say as follows, that 50% of our country, of those polled, agree that Muslims in America should have the choice of being governed according to Sharia. Sharia, he said, authorizes such atrocities as murder against non-believers who won't convert, beheadings, and more unthinkable acts that pose great harm to Americans, especially women. Little wonder that after those remarks, there was a recorded rise in attacks against Muslims in America. Now, why do I argue for the exclusion of Donald Trump? I do so because if I can turn, Mr. Chairman, to the context of us having this debate. There is a uniquely awful threat facing our country, a generational threat of evil terrorism. We are now seeing terrorist arrests at the rate of 1 a day in Britain. Key to preventing terrorist attacks has been the patient building by our police service of good relationships with the Muslim community through neighbourhood policing. That has been key to the successful detection of terrorist after terrorist in our country. And the nature of terrorism confronting our country takes two forms. First, it's the organised cells organised from Raqqa. And secondly, it is a strategy to radicalise the vulnerable, in particular those with mental illness, and in particular those who suffer from the victimhood encouraged by ISIS. And what makes Donald Trump's presence in our country so dangerous is that in the current febrile climate, ISIS needs Donald Trump and Donald Trump needs ISIS. ISIS needs to be able to say, on the one hand, Muslims, you are under attack. Donald Trump needs to be able to say, on the other hand, you are under attack by Muslims. And that's why I strongly believe that he should not be allowed to come to our country. Just think what would happen in the current climate if he came to Birmingham, to London, to Glasgow, and preached that message of divisive hate. It would be damaging, it would be dangerous, it would be deeply divisive.
The honourable gentleman is making some really interesting points. The examples that he's used, though, more surely are about Donald Trump being a bigot rather than hatred. Britain is pretty good at roasting beef. Do you not think it's better that we just roast Trump?
I'm sorry, I don't think a debate like this calls for flippancy at a time like this. With the greatest of respect, when our police service and our security services are working night and day to prevent our country being attacked, and when they need the support of the Muslim community, to have someone come to our shores who demonises all of the Muslim community would be fundamentally wrong and would undermine the safety and security of our citizens. And that's not a risk I am prepared to take.
Gentleman, give way. I hear what the right honourable gentleman is saying very powerfully, and that has also been echoed by the Muslim members who have given some powerful evidence about how Donald Trump makes them feel. However, are not British values strong enough to stand up to that? And doesn't it help our Muslim community to hear voices on all sides of this House stand up for the values that we believe in as a nation?
I strongly believe in the unity of all faith and indeed across the political spectrum to reject terrorism. And I welcome some of the initiatives that have been taken, and I think all of us as members have been involved in these in our respective constituencies. Some of the things that we have done in Birmingham. But the simple reality is, if you get a vulnerable young man radicalised who has got mental illness, who believes in the victimhood promoted by ISIS, and he hears Donald Trump in London or Birmingham, the consequences of that could be very serious indeed. So, Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, I don't think Donald Trump should be allowed within 1,000 miles of our shore, because he would embolden the EDL on the one hand and fuel the flames of terrorism on the other hand. Donald Trump is free to be a fool, but he's not free to be a dangerous fool in Britain.
Hear, hear. Thank you very much, David. The principle of free thought is not free thought for those who agree with us, but freedom of thought for the thoughts we hate. So said Justice Oliver Wendell of the US Supreme Court. Of course, there are limits to freedom of expression, even in a libertarian democracy, where statements will cause real harm. But if we fear all outrageous statements, if we fear a swell of support for unpopular views, if we fear challenge, we will not only stifle free thought, we will stifle independence and liberty. We will lose the opportunity to rebut, exposed to argument, analysis, and scrutiny, and we will lose the opportunity to win over those who may have listened and silently supported and agreed. Limiting free speech does not always quash unwelcome beliefs. France has more laws restricting free speech than any other Western democracy. It also has Europe's largest far-right party. In 2009, Nick Griffin appeared on Question Time, watched by 8 million people. At the time, the BNP polled 6.26% of the national vote. But in the first general election after that, not only did they fail to win a seat, but they fragmented in the polls. And last week it was announced by the Electoral Commission that the BNP had been stripped of its status as an official political party.
let me just finish the point. The New Statesman referred to the poor performance on Question Time as a factor in eroding Nick Griffin's popularity and the support of the BNP. To persuade those who may share the beliefs of the Speaker, we need to do more than silence them. We need to address the real grievances of those who may support them. We need to listen, we need to take note, and then we need to respond. I will give way.
Tulip Sadiq.
I thank the honourable member and my constituent for giving way. Does the honourable lady know that after Nick Griffin appeared on Question Time, in the 24 hours after he appeared, 3,000 people joined the BNP immediately after he had a platform?
It's important to have free speech and so that we have debate. So Nick Griffin's discussion at Question Time will have evoked a number of responses. Of course there will be people, when there is an advocate for something, of course there will always be people who follow them, and that may be a small minority. But what we need to do is put those voices out there in order to slam them down. And that ultimately is what has happened to the BNP. Donald Trump's statement that all Muslims should be banned from the US wrongly categorises an entire religion with a few extremists. His statements should be exposed as such. Now is not the time to ban him. Now is the time to say very clearly that extremist Islamists are wrong and must be rooted out and stopped. Now is the time to say that the Muslim community is not Daesh. Now is the time to say that Muslims have given us such things as algebra and transformed the study of light and optics. These discoveries have founded one of the bases for our modern technologies. But the other real difficulty is that Donald Trump is a presidential candidate. If we ban the leader of every country who made offensive, inappropriate or inflammatory statements, or who took steps that we didn't approve of, we would have a much more limited foreign policy. Indeed, we may not even have a leader of the opposition. Mr. Chairman, I welcome both petitions. I welcome this debate because we live in a democracy which respects freedom of expression. And when people make unacceptable statements, what we need to do is to use our capacity to expose their weaknesses and then ultimately defeat their arguments.
Air Carrick and Cumnock, the constituency that I am honoured to represent in this House, is a diverse bit of Scotland incorporating bustling towns, picturesque villages and rolling countryside. It's famous for its rugged coastline, stunning beaches and the birthplace, some 257 years ago next week, Scotland's national bird. It's also the home to one of the world's earliest and most enduringly successful purpose-built golf resorts. In 1902, golf designer Willie Fernie was commissioned by the 3rd Marquess of Ailsa to lay out a championship course at Turnberry, which has subsequently staged the Open Championships 4 times. Which brings me to why I'm speaking here today. Disappointingly, Turnberry has been dragged into this debate because the world-renowned course and resort that it sits in was bought by Donald Trump in 2014. It's undergoing a complete refurbishment as we speak. The Trump organisation is investing £200 million in the resort, and to date, the materials for the development have been sourced locally. They use local produce in the restaurants and employing some 200 local people, a figure set to rise when the hotel reopens this summer. In addition, Turnberry is expecting 300 contractors on site next month, many of them also local, all of them spending money in our local businesses and thus contributing to the local economy. This is a stark contrast to the Turnberry a few short years ago. Throughout the 1990s, the majority of staff were seasonal and you'd have been hard-pushed to hear an Ayrshire accent among them. Now 80% of the staff are local. Under previous owners, food and drink for the resort's bar and restaurants were ordered through a company here in London. Now, local farmers are consulted in the menu development. Despite promises of investment, the previous owners, Dubai World, proposed closing the resort from October to Easter. as their failure to invest in the venue meant it was unsustainable as a year-round resort. Before Trump Organisation came in, staff were worried it would shut down altogether. Now they're looking to employ between 350 and 400 people, the vast majority on full-time contracts with part-time staff guaranteed hours and average 20 hours a week. In a constituency with youth unemployment rate above 5%, Trump Turnberry is home to 24 apprentices and will employ around 80 local 16 to 24-year-olds, many of whom will continue to progress their careers at the resort. I spent time at Turnberry last week and I spoke to staff, contractors and members, and there is no ambiguity about their feelings in this issue. They don't talk about Trump the politician, they don't talk about Trump the showman. They talk about a man with a passion for golf, with a commitment and a clear vision for the future for this resort. They talk of an organisation, a family-run business that consults with local people, that an ambitious plan for the future of the area had an ambition that was being backed up by action. I heard last week from a gentleman who has played at the course for 60 years, who talked of the respect that had been shown to the ordinary members, who talked about how lucky they were that this historic course had been left languishing for years, has now found an engaged benefactor. Donald Trump is a divisive character, and I have no intentions of standing here to defend the man. His comments on Chinese people, on Mexican immigrants, on women have been deplorable, and certainly don't mirror the type of politics we aspire to in Scotland. The man seems to out-Trump himself, no pun intended, each time he speaks in his bid to gain Republican nomination. And I am delighted that over 500,000 people here in the UK have chosen to call him out on their latest statements by standing up for our Muslim community and signing this petition. However, Air Carrick and Cumnock can't afford to spurn the investment of the Trump Organisation because the head of the family business is spouting offensive right-wing rhetoric in an election campaign thousands of miles away. Trump's ability to run off at the mouth may well prove detrimental to his ambitions to host the Open, but being banned from the UK will ultimately be little more than a minor irritant for the man. 1 in 3 children in my constituency are growing up in poverty. Our beautiful landscapes are scarred by abandoned open-cast mines, and almost 14% of the working-age population are on out-of-work benefits. In the words of the club captain, if the Trump Organisation pulls out of Turnberry because its head is locked out, it would be catastrophic for the resort and a tragedy for the local community. And whilst I agree with other sentiments in this debate, I feel my role here is to speak for my constituency. Mr Chairman, banning someone for wanting to ban others, in my view, is an inappropriate response. And perhaps it's not just Mr Trump who would benefit from reflecting on the words of Burns when he wrote to Luce, "Oh, what some power the gift to give us to see ourselves as others see us." Thank you.
Philip Davis.
We find ourselves in the ridiculous position where some people are so outraged that Donald Trump has suggested that we should ban people simply because of their beliefs, that those people want to ban Donald Trump for his beliefs, which is a completely ridiculous situation. Now, across the pond, Donald Trump has been waging what might be described as a one-man campaign against political correctness for some time. And as someone who has had their own campaign against political correctness for some time here in this Parliament, nobody will be surprised to hear that I can relate to that. And in the race to become the next president, he's been gaining support with a political manner that can be described as blunt directness. He is definitely straight-talking, and as a Yorkshireman, I certainly applaud him for that too. In fact, I think in this country we could do with rather less political correctness and much more straight-talking across the board, and I think many of our constituents would agree. Now, we should be absolutely clear that today we're debating whether or not a man who has a chance of becoming the next President of the United States of America should be physically banned from entering the United Kingdom. By anyone's standards, that is a rather big thing. His offence, to warrant such a call, is to suggest a ban on incoming Muslims to America until, as he puts it, our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. Now, it's extremely clear that in the Western world we are experiencing very difficult and dangerous times. Violent attacks are becoming all too frequent inside free countries, perpetrated by those who seek to replace freedom with religious conformity. The sickening march of Islamic State is something that all right-thinking people are deeply worried about. And it's also clear that one path for terrorists and those who hate our way of life, of living in our Western countries, is to enter as immigrants and refugees. Now, determining what to do about that clear and worrying problem will obviously result in people having differing suggested solutions. Now, some people, and I may be so bold as to say that there will be some people in all of our constituents who will agree with Donald Trump's view, and some will disagree with Donald Trump's view. Now, as it happens, Sir David, I happen to disagree with Donald Trump's view. But whatever people think, surely he should be entitled to have this opinion and to express it, and to give all of those people who have that view a voice in the political process. Now, there was actually an opinion poll on this matter, Sir David, which actually showed that in the United Kingdom, 65% disagreed with Donald Trump and 24% agreed with him. And when that was actually moved into the north of the country, the people who agreed with Donald Trump went from 24% to 35%. Now, by anybody's standards, that is a significant body of the population. Now, lots of people in this room who are always talking about the rights of minorities seem very quiet all of a sudden when people who have a minority opinion have the nerve to express it. What about the rights of those minorities in this country? It's amazing that the people who always preach about tolerance and we shouldn't have any intolerance are always the very same people who are so intolerant of anybody who happens to have a different opinion to them. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Can I ask him, does he think, are there any limits to freedom of speech then? And would there come a point where someone like Donald Trump should be banned because the words that he said are just so extreme? Because many of us on this side feel that already he is inciting hatred against the Muslim community, both in this country and across the world.
Well, I don't accept the honourable gentleman's analysis, but yes, there do need to be some restrictions on free speech, and they are if people are inciting violence or terrorism, then that's free speech should be restricted and is unacceptable. But we certainly should not go around banning everyone from the country simply for voicing an opinion that the honourable gentleman happens to disagree with. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Honourable gentleman for giving way. Sir David, I don't know if I'm sure the honourable gentleman would agree that this motion is actually embarrassing to the UK and makes us look intolerant and totalitarian. And I feel we should almost apologise to the people of the United States. It's for them to decide on Mr. Trump's views, not us. And I think we should also remind people in America that these people over here represent less than 1% of the population of this country.
Well, I share the sentiment behind my honourable friend's contribution. I think it is ridiculous, frankly, that we are needing to have such a debate in a country that has always prided itself on freedom and free speech. And no, I won't, because other people need to speak. I'm afraid there isn't time. The real issue for me, the honourable lady had her say, the real issue for me is not actually Donald Trump's remarks, but it's actually the reaction to them. He's not a serious threat of harm to our society in any way. The uproar is largely because he's rich, white and politically incorrect, and that to me is really the crux of the issue. The debate today is actually as much to do with political correctness as it is to do with his comments. The political correctness that attacks free speech, the free speech which quite rightly Americans hold very dear, as indeed do many of us here in this country. And the irony is, it's that in part because of political correctness that the straight talking of Donald Trump has proved so popular with the electorate over there. People are fed up of being told what they can and can't think, what they can and can't say, and they find it refreshing, even whether they agree with him or disagree with him. They find it refreshing to find a politician who has the guts to stand up and says what he thinks, even if it's controversial and even when it's unpopular. And so, David, in many cases, we should celebrate more often politicians who stand up and say things that are unpopular and things that are controversial. It's easy for anybody to stand up and trot out some motherhood and apple pie and something that's popular. Any old fool can trot out all of that stuff. But it takes real guts to say things unpopular and controversial. And in that regard, I have a lot of respect for the leader of the opposition, who makes a hallmark of saying unpopular things and controversial things. And I will always defend his right to do that too. There are many people who are tolerated in this country because of what we believe in free speech. People who I think will be placed higher up the barred list by many of my constituents than Donald Trump. Those who preach their hatred of all things British from our own soil. Those who denounce freedom generally and hate the Western way of protecting our very important individual freedoms and values. The silencing of opinion that we've seen in both countries only builds up a resentment that otherwise would never exist. There are people in this country who stand up for the rights of foreign criminals who we seek to deport from this country and are unable to do so because of human rights laws. Many of the people who are so keen to ban Donald Trump for entering the country are exactly the same people who are so keen to keep foreign criminals in this country who we're trying to deport from the country. And we're debating whether or not Donald Trump should be banned. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely outrageous. And I end, Sir David, on the point I made at the start, that for anybody to think that they're so outraged that Donald Trump thinks that people should be banned from his country because of their beliefs, can think that the solution to that problem is to ban Donald Trump for his beliefs, is absolutely ridiculous. You couldn't make it up, and I couldn't agree less than that if I tried.
Mr Gavin Newlands.
Sir David, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to say it's a pleasure to follow the honourable member for Shipley, but instead I'll congratulate the over 600,000 petitioners who have combined unintentionally to bring this debate to Parliament. And I'd like to pay tribute to previous speeches made by honourable colleagues and to the honourable member for Newport West, who led the debate in his own inimitable and, on this occasion, balanced manner. It horrifies me to think that in the 21st century we're still dealing with issues of racism, sexism, bigotry and any other form of prejudice that Donald J. Trump can squeeze into his campaign. Let's be clear, Donald Trump is an idiot. I've tried to find different, perhaps more parliamentary adjectives to describe Trump, but none were really clear enough. He's an idiot. The fact that such a person can get so deep into the selection battle to be the Republican Party candidate for President of the United States, the most powerful job in the world, speaks volumes about how far the once mighty GOP of Lincoln and Roosevelt has fallen. The petitioners have asked us to consider banning or otherwise a possible presidential candidate from entering the UK. The question we should be asking ourselves is, should Trump be treated differently from anyone else because of who he is, how rich he is, how powerful he may become, or what business interests he may have in the UK? Our immigration rules have to cover everyone, regardless of how powerful they are or what religion they believe in. If we are to ban extremists, then we should consider banning Christian extremists in the same way and to the same extent that we consider banning Muslim extremists from travelling to the UK. Each and every day, young people are being held back and bullied on the basis of gender, the colour of their skin, the creed of their school, their sexuality or a disability. And each and every day, a family live in fear because they've had the audacity to flee a war-torn country. The people who are victims of these hateful and poisonous acts look to authority figures and lawmakers to help solve this issue and protect them in the future. However, today's debate asks us to contemplate the likely situation that a bigot and downright bully will be elected to the position of President of the United States. If Trump is able to stand on Capitol Hill next January and deliver the oath of office, it will send a message to bigots, racists and sexists the world over. It will say to the bullies that your behaviour is okay, that bigotry is not only okay but commendable, and it's okay to hate people who may look, speak or act differently from you. The question before us today is how we as a united Parliament defeat the hateful politics of Donald Trump and others like him. I am in two minds about this particular issue. I want to challenge Trump head-on, showing him how ridiculous his views are and defeating his poison by highlighting the contribution that everyone, no matter the background, makes to society. However, I also want us to treat Mr Trump in the same way we treat everyone else who has been banned from the UK. The arguments for banning Trump are based on the principle that we ban other hateful preachers and extremists from the UK, and therefore why shouldn't we add Trump to that undesirable list? It is unclear how many individuals the UK government have banned from visiting the UK. However, in 2014, the Home Secretary indicated that she had excluded hundreds of people from gaining entry in the UK. Therefore, on what grounds would it be acceptable to ban these people but not also ban Mr Trump, who, in the Prime Minister's own words, has also used language that is divisive, stupid and wrong. The Home Secretary and her officials are able to refuse entry to the UK for reasons related to a person's character, conduct, associations, or if their presence would not be conducive to the public good. A list of unacceptable behaviours was published in 2005, which included using means or medium which foster hatred, which might lead to inter-community violence. Mr Chairman, on that basis, in order to ensure that we are operating in a consistent manner, then I see no reason why Trump should be allowed a visa to visit the UK. His racist, bigoted and sexist views are dangerous and divisive. He doesn't believe that women are equal to men, although in reality, he doesn't believe that women are equal to men, although in reality I think he believes that no one is quite equal to the Donald. And I do have sympathy with the view that because he wants to ban Muslims from entering the United States, that we should ban him from the UK. I agree with a lot of the arguments put forward by those who would ban him. However, I want to tackle the poisonous views and policies that Trump believes in head on. The way that we defeat people like Trump is by showing them how outrageous his views in the world are. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Invitations should be extended to Trump to visit a local mosque, to meet with ordinary Muslims to discuss their beliefs, to meet refugee families fleeing bloody war to hear their stories, to meet feminist and LGBTI groups to debate equality, to homeless shelters, and so on and so on. Let him debate all of these issues and he will soon be found out for what he is, an idiot. Exactly. Trump's rhetoric is not dissimilar to that spouted by Nick Griffin and the BNP, and where is he now? We cannot and should not be afraid to tackle the views held by Trump and others like him. To do so would mean that they will be able to try and convert others to their cause without being fully challenged. The fight against racism, bigotry, sexism, in fact, prejudice in general is not over. We've got a long way to go to ensure we see equality and fairness throughout the world. We cannot allow bullies like Trump to think he can continue to offend people based on how they look, who they love, or who they believe in. We should send out a message saying no to Trump and his bigoted politics, but we should do so through the power of argument. By no means should we roll out the red carpet, but let Trump come to the UK and have that debate. He will soon wish he had been banned.
Quasi-Quarter. Thank you, sir. David. I'm very grateful to be called at this late stage in the debate. I think it's been an interesting debate, lots of very sincerely held views. Now, as a matter of fact, it is Martin Luther King Day, and I think if Martin Luther King were here today, he'd be very surprised at some of the sugar-coated version of American history that has been on display today. I hate to say it, I regret to say this, but what Trump has proposed has been proposed many times in American legislation. The outright ban of people on the basis of race or colour or ethnicity is something which, regrettably, has often happened in United States history. You only need to look at the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which was on the statute for 61 years, in which Chinese labourers were banned from entering the United States. The Immigration Act of 1924 similarly banned Arabs and Asians and was only changed in 1952. So Martin Luther King would be very surprised at the very, one might say politically correct, although I don't want to use that term, but the very sanitized version of American history and politics that we've heard today. And in that light, Donald J. Trump's objectionable, hateful views have a history in the American political arena. They're not unusual, they're not something that's he dreamt out from his own head. They come in a long line of nativist legislation. Now, we can object to this, we can decry this, we can say it's terrible and evil and bad, but that is no grounds on which to ban a presidential candidate. He would even say, he would suggest that his ban was a temporary ban. That's what he said in his speech in South Carolina. You will note that the Chinese Exclusion Act was not a temporary ban. It lasted for 60 years. The Immigration Acts of 1924 were not a temporary ban on Asians and Arabs. They lasted for 30 years. So his form of nativism is something which I'm afraid to say, and Martin Luther King would, I'm sure, agree with me, is something which the history of the United States, regrettably, is full of. And so Donald Trump is in a long tradition, but that doesn't mean we should ban him. And all the arguments that have been made against the ban, I think, are absolutely valid. And I will say this, no one has said it, but I will say it in this debate. If the United Kingdom were to ban Donald J. Trump from coming into Britain, that would be the biggest boost for his campaign in America that we could possibly give. Absolutely. In terms of publicity, in terms of the patriotism of the United States, not wishing other countries to impose upon them to try and shape and determine the outcome of their elections. This would be a spectacular own goal. I remember the Guardian attempt in 2004 to stop George Bush from becoming re-elected, from being re-elected in that campaign. And I think a very misguided Guardian journalist, and I mean no slur on that paper, but they had a writing campaign, a letter campaign to the people in Ohio. They'd identified that Ohio was a key swing state, and they got some of their readers to write to individual electors in that state, urging them not to vote for George W. Bush. Needless to say, I'm sure members of the House will not be surprised to learn that George W. Bush carried Ohio and was indeed re-elected as President of the United States. That campaign was often cited as a way in which foreigners, people trying to intervene in the election of another state, could get things completely wrong. And the same thing, I'm very happy to give way.
Thank you. Thank you. Very generous of you to give way. I'm very grateful. Does the honourable member not see the difference in the discussion? We are not seeking at all to influence what happens in the American presidential candidates' elections or elections to follow. We're talking about what we can do here. We're talking about asking the Home Secretary to be consistent in her approach she's used and rules she's used in relation to 84 other preachers, that those same rules be applied to Donald Trump in this country. We're talking about the United Kingdom, not anywhere else.
I fully appreciate the Honourable Lady's remarks. And as far as she is concerned, in her own mind, that is the case. But I'm asking her to consider what the people of America would, how would they interpret the ban? How would they don't have the luxury of having her sorts of lucidity and understanding how our conventions and debates work. The headline, I'm very happy to give way.
I thank Honourable Member, because you make my point for me. It's all very well to say that let Donald Trump come here and have the discussion with us. He wishes to ban people like me, and the lucidity to which you refer, to going to the United States of America to make the case for the Muslims of this country who want to live in peace and harmony, who are not represented by Daesh. That is the point, and I thank Honourable Member for giving way and allowing me to make that.
I fully appreciate her remark, but as other people have observed, the answer to his ban is not to ban him. That doesn't make any sense to me, and I'll explain very briefly. He is banning Muslims. In his own mind, he's saying that Muslims constitute a danger to the United States. That's what he thinks. And on those grounds, he is banning them. Now, we are doing the same thing if we were to ban him. We are saying that Donald Trump represents a danger to the United Kingdom, and on that ground, we are banning him from coming. The implied logic is exactly the same. The circumstances are different, but the logical thought is exactly the same. I'm quite happy to give way.
I thoroughly disagree with the honourable member on saying that it's exactly the same. It is not exactly the same. Donald Trump has said he wants to ban all Muslims because of their religion. That's 1.6 billion people he wants to ban because of their religion. The reason why the members on this, or some members, are asking for him to be banned is because of the rhetoric and the sentiment and the values that he's expressed. That is different from banning someone because of their religion. I hope that point is clear to another member who made the same point.
I've been very generous in my interventions, but I want to clarify that point. I don't have much time. But as I repeat, the grounds upon which he is banning Muslims isn't because of their faith. It is because he believes that they constitute a danger to the United States. That is the ground. All of that. I mean, I'm just explaining his logic. I don't agree with it. And I'm saying that any case to ban Donald Trump would be on the basis that he is a danger to our civic safety. Very briefly. Logically, it is exactly the same.
Very briefly. On that point about 1.6 billion Muslims, thank God there are 1.6 billion Trumps.
Yes, it would make our lives, I think it will make our lives very, very difficult. But lastly, what I would say in conclusion, it's been a very engaging, very enlightening debate. But what I would say is, beyond the immense publicity, and it's no good to say that, oh, he's got a huge publicity at the moment, so any more wouldn't make any difference. We've seen throughout his campaign, he was well known at the beginning of his campaign, but we've seen that there's been a growing crescendo of excitement, of interest in the campaign. The very fact of this debate, as someone else observed, is generating and stoking that, that excitement. I'm not going to take any more interventions. I can see the lady itching in her seat, but I will resist that temptation. But what I'm saying is that we are simply adding fuel to this whole media circus, and this is playing exactly into his hands. And a ban, if it were, would be a headline throughout the world. It would simply reignite all the publicity that he generated with his outrageous policy, and would exacerbate the situation, would make it more likely that he would be the eventual victor in the Republican nomination fight, and may well, who knows, win the election in November. And then we would be in this absurd situation, Mr. Chairman, in which we would have banned the President of the United States from coming to Britain, which is insane. It's an insane situation to be in. And people who say that he has no chance of becoming president, this is my final point. Look at the odds on Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition.
Oh, I know.
I think someone in Essex, I'm not sure whether it was in your constituency, Mr. Chairman, made £2,000, having put £10 on him at 200 to 1. And I can assure you, as of today, the chances of Donald Trump becoming president are far greater than 200 to 1.
Yeah. Sarah Wollaston. Nice one.
Thank you, Sir David. I think the question for the Home Secretary is this: is Donald Trump conducive to the public good? And I think we've had a lot of talk in this debate about buffoonery, terms like blunt directness. I would say that if I were Muslim, and I'm not, I speak as a gentle atheist, I would find that repulsive. The thought that I should be excluded from the United States of America for no other reason than that I was a Muslim. I'm proud to represent Dartmouth. And from Dartmouth, nearly 400 years ago, the Pilgrim Fathers sailed to the Americas. And they sailed to escape from the kind of religious persecution that we're addressing today. And because we've seen the results in Europe of what happens when you demonize an entire people for no other reason from their race. So I don't think that we should trivialize this discussion. I think it's a really important debate. Nor do I think that the result of the US presidential election will be decided on whether or not we in this House or whether the Home Secretary decides to exclude Donald Trump. In fact, I would argue that should Donald Trump be excluded from one of the US's oldest allies, that would send a very clear message to the people of the United States about what we feel about those who demonize an entire people for no reason other than their religion. That said, I don't think there is any realistic prospect that the Home Secretary will ban Donald Trump. But let's, as this House, send a very clear message to Muslims in this country, to British Muslims, that we value you, that we value your contribution, that we will take this petition very seriously, and that perhaps those arguments about religious freedom matter as much now as they did 400 years ago. And I welcome everybody across the pond in the United States who may be following this debate back to my constituency, the most beautiful constituency in Britain, to come and see where the Pilgrim Fathers sailed from Dartmouth. And the anniversary is in 2020. But I'd say to them all, and I'd say to Donald Trump, just reflect on the consequences of your kind of religious bigotry. This is not a laughing matter. Think again, and if you do visit this country, take time to visit the mosques. Take time to meet Muslims. Take time to understand just how profoundly offensive and dangerous that kind of thinking is. And there is no place for it in this country or in the United States.
Thank you, Sir David. 25 years ago, I was in New York City, and out of some sort of mawkish interest, perhaps in his notoriety, I visited, I actually did two things related to Mr. Trump. I visited the Trump Tower, which is a sort of a black and gold edifice to a certain sort of narcissism, and I read his book, The Art of the Deal, which I have to say was pretty similar in many ways.
And, you know, these things weren't very edifying, and his activities since haven't got any more edifying, I would say. We have in this country, though, a long history of civilizing tolerance, developed out of conflict, deliberation, and progress. This place, Westminster Hall, is a place of particular resonance in that history, where overbearing attitudes have been brought into line with the thinking of the day, sometimes with force, even when held by the most powerful. King Charles I was sentenced to death just a few yards from this place. MPs here represent their constituents by leave of those who send them, and the sensible ones keep close to mind the summary nature of the decisions of the public opinion which can end it. Those from whom the public withdraws their support have somewhat better prospects than in the past, happily. No longer do political disagreements lead to duels, disembowelment, or decapitation. There is a settled and more civilized system of elections, debates, votes, and law courts to govern us, and for this we must all be grateful. So when a terrorist menace threatens our hard-won civilization with a throwback to barbaric and outdated methods of dealing with difference and brings them to our shores, it is right that we should oppose it in the strongest terms. Our American cousins feel no differently. They are conscious of freedom, born of escape from religious intolerance, as we just heard, a need to be self-reliant, and a desire to make their own economic destiny, and their own strong democratic and legal institutions have been forged out of traumatic disagreement too. When they speak, we should listen, even if we disagree, and we should be robust with them where necessary and encourage them not to take retrograde steps. And so back to Mr. Trump, the Donald, the orange prince of American self-publicity, more public now than usual because he will be running for president if he wins the nomination as Republican candidate, and possibly be close to the presidency should Bernie Sanders and not Hillary Clinton be selected as the Democrat candidate. He has said things which many of us would not, and the addition of celebrity has been somewhat grotesque. To say he would ban Muslims from entering America was too simplistic, unhelpful, and wrong. But I don't think there is evidence he does not believe in democracy itself. So talk of fascism is, to this point, a bit overblown, notwithstanding his bedtime reading might have left quite a lot to be desired, as we heard earlier. While cynically expressed and exploited by Mr. Trump, people's concerns about the terrorist challenge do need to be addressed. However, we need to work positively with Muslim communities, not demonize them. Where better for Mr. Trump's spurious opinions and characterizations to be debated and debunked than here in the UK, the crucible of modern democracy, in which heads are no longer lost for dissent? Who would not want to watch him pricked, poked, and prodded on "Have I got news for you?" So let him come. Bad opinions and characters have been allowed in Britain before, not a few of them homegrown, and we would not want him. We would not want to allow him any victimhood with which further to hoodwink people. I hope that honest British Muslims would have their say, and even more people would then decide not to vote for him and to use their good sense. Less seriously, who knows? Up close, we might also get to see just what is under that hair.
Anne McLaughlin.
Thank you, Sir David. This petition, with over 500,000 signatures, is a welcome indication of the scale of revulsion with which we in these islands treat the xenophobia of Donald Trump. Now, I'm here to sum up for the SNP, although I doubt many parties have an actual policy on Donald Trump. Thankfully, it's not been needed until necessary. And whilst I don't necessarily support a complete ban on Mr. Trump from entry into this country, it's clear that his bigoted remarks against Muslims, against Mexicans, and against other minorities, but particularly his remarks about Muslims, deserve the utmost condemnation from all sides of this House and all parts of society. So can I say at this point that I am proud of the petitioners and all of those who signed this petition for rejecting the outrageous xenophobia and Islamophobia of this man. And I hope they won't take to heart too much the ticking off that they've had from some people on those benches for daring to raise this subject. And there have been arguments some interesting arguments on both sides of the debate today. Those who are against banning but oppose Donald Trump and everything that he stands for have talked of bringing him here to educate him. And I didn't really I didn't have the same understanding as I think other honourable members have had of what they meant by that when they said, I'd like to invite him to my constituency and take him to the mosque to meet some Muslims. I thought perhaps, maybe those people would teach him a thing or two, and they would be absolutely right to do that. The other argument, the strongest argument I feel in favour of banning him is simply the argument of equality. And I think the Minister needs to answer, is it correct when other members say that there are other cases very similar that are treated extremely differently? I think that's something he has to answer. And indeed, I think the very fact that this petition was so popular highlights three worthy and important points. The first is that we in these islands reject wholeheartedly the notion of discriminating against anyone on the basis of their religion. The second is that it points out that individuals of power such as Trump are happy to demonise others, but would never consider that they themselves could be treated in such a fashion. And thirdly, the public revulsion in this country and in the United States, because let's not forget there was an outcry in the United States from the many good people in that country to the statements of this public figure highlights the fact that Trump's statement goes against all of the shared Enlightenment values that ties the states and the countries of the United Kingdom together. And whilst we can recognise that his statements were distasteful, we should also note the hypocrisy of this son of an immigrant, of a religious minority, advocating the being so bigoted against other migrants and religious minorities. Donald... Well, okay. Very briefly.
I'm afraid this debate actually in America is far more nuanced than what she says. All the Republican candidates in this election are expressing a traditional American view that America is a melting pot. It doesn't matter where you come from, but you have to be loyal to the flag and you have to be loyal to America. And there is this feeling in America. Now, Trump may be articulating this in a particularly controversial and extreme way, but for us to deny that many ordinary people in America are worried about their Americanness is to deny the real debate that's going on in America, which is a valid debate.
Order. Just before the Honourable Lady resumes her speech, just to say we are not so tight for time as we thought about 10 minutes ago. The debate can continue until 7:30. Anne McLaughlin.
Thank you very much, Sir David. And I would just say to the honourable member there that he talks about Republican politicians, but there are other politicians, there are other activists in the United States of America who don't agree with his assessment of the situation. I want to look at Donald Trump, the man, the boy. As his first name suggests, he is the son of a Scottish immigrant, and I apologise for that. Like countless others, his mother, Mary Ann MacLeod, left her homeland during the Great Depression and went to what was, after all, the land of liberty. This desire for economic opportunity is the same thing that motivates many migrants from many other countries to go to America today. The Mexican migrants who Trump so roundly defamed are engaged in the same quest that his forebears undertook. As a man who purports to be proud of his New York heritage, Trump would do well to look to Lady Liberty for some advice on immigration. Of course, we would also do well to remind Donald Trump, as the son of a Scottish Presbyterian, of the countless generations of immigrants who left these shores and went to the US in search of religious toleration. The Puritans may have got a shock when they landed on Plymouth Rock, but they certainly did go on to forge a society where your religion was, to a greater or lesser extent, irrelevant in public life. So whilst trailblazers like Al Smith and John F. Kennedy still faced anti-Catholic prejudice when they ran for office, they were always able to fall back on the fundamental truth that religious bigotry goes against all of the Enlightenment values that America shares with Europe. It is easy for those of us protected by this parliamentary bubble to consider proposals and rhetoric such as Trump's as being distasteful, opportunistic. Some people thought it was funny and crude. But all of us in public life have a duty to work for the common good and to oppose discrimination, and I don't think anyone in here would disagree with that. Yep.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. The Honourable Member said earlier on in her speech that she hoped that the Home Secretary would consider whether this case was any different from the others that were raised. Does the Honourable Member not think that this case is considerably different from the other cases, in that this is a presidential candidate? And if a presidential candidate was banned and became president, then in those circumstances, then the ability to forge links and discuss policy on a whole range of issues would be extremely difficult.
Well, that is why I'm summing up and I'm giving, I think, both sides of the argument. I'm just maybe a bit more vociferous in my opposition to Donald Trump, the person. I do understand that. I understand that argument. But the way that I see it being different because he's a presidential candidate is that he should be less likely to get away with these things because he has far more influence over many more people. When you have someone of... Yes, I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you, Sir David. But surely the point is that Donald Trump wants to ban parliamentarians from this parliament entering America, so he should know better if he's a presidential candidate.
I completely agree with that. He should know better. And it kind of, made me smile to myself when I heard arguments from members opposite saying that we should not be interfering in anybody's chances in the political processes, and yet we have MPs in this Parliament that he would stop from visiting his country. When you have someone of his prominence running for the most powerful political position on this planet, actively encouraging discrimination as state policy, that divides communities. It can't do anything else. That example leads to countless acts of low-level bigotry and hatred which will never be reported. But I want to turn to some of those examples which have been reported and the rise, not just down to what Donald Trump said, but his like in Islamophobia. A friend of mine who is an SNP councillor in Glasgow talked after the Paris attacks of his son being afraid to walk to school because he was seeing the headlines on the front pages of newspapers, and one in particular claiming that a significant percentage, and I think it might even have said a majority of Muslims supported terrorism. That child was frightened to go to school. And when some Muslim children are going to school, they're being called terrorists and bombers. They have absolutely no connection to any of the terrorist activities that are going on. Today, David Cameron announced funding to assist in English language lessons. Now, I agree we should be supporting people to integrate. We should be supporting people, not forcing people. But my understanding is that this funding is for Muslim women. Well, what has religion got to do with the English language? And how will that work? Will Muslim women be routinely tested to see if their English language skills are up to speed? Has my honourable friend beside me already passed that test, or does she have to take a test in English? It's ridiculous. And if he did indeed say that the money was for Muslim women, not women who don't speak English, but Muslim women, and that's not just how some of the press interpreted it, then that is wrong and in itself will assist Islamophobia. Now, I'm sure it's not deliberate, but we all need to remember that language is so important, and we all would do well to mind the language that we use. But Donald Trump, it wasn't just the language that he used, it was the intent behind a prepared statement. Now, in pre-war Europe, the Jews were forcibly registered. Donald Trump called for Muslims not to be just banned from coming into the country, but to be registered and to be tracked. And to my mind, there is no difference between that and what they did to the Jews in pre-war Europe. And that leads me on to a number of questions that I have for the Minister. Firstly, does he agree with his colleagues, some of his colleagues, that the impact of Donald Trump saying what he did is no greater and no more dangerous than their constituents saying it to each other? Secondly, is he comfortable that somebody like Donald Trump will automatically be allowed to come into this country when I know several people who cannot get their wives or their husbands into the country even for a visit? And I see he's shaking his head. but are they not as deserving of the right to visit this country? If he is allowed to be allowed into the country, will the Immigration Minister be expecting Donald Trump to retract what he said before he comes in here? And another question, if the President of China had called for all Christians to refuse entry to China, would he still have been invited to this country last year? Or would we have been saying, oh, but he's the President, because so many have said, oh, but he might be the President. I will when I finish my sentence. He's the President, or he's got the right to offend. Oh, but lots of my constituents think like that. Would he get the same treatment that Donald Trump is getting from this government?
Very pleased. On that very point about banning heads of state, it's widely known that Mecca has been banned for Christians for hundreds of years, yet we entertain and have entertained the King of Saudi Arabia. Indeed, Mecca and Medina are banned, prescribed for Christians.
I would just say that there are a number of other people that I'm not comfortable that they are cozying up to the UK government's cozying up to them for a number of other reasons, Saudi Arabia being amongst them. Does the Minister agree with me? I'm not expecting that the Minister's writing all these down and is going to answer them all, but I live in hope. Does he agree with me that my honourable friend, the member for Oakland and South Perthshire, always gives top-rate, passionate speeches about her personal commitment to equality for all? And is it acceptable for us to welcome in the man who would stop my honourable friend and her children from entering the United States? And finally, my final question, that is, not my final statement, will the Minister join me in condemning the nasty, abusive, racist tweets that my honourable friend has sat here receiving on account of her daring to speak out against Donald Trump? And does he think Donald Trump's statement, his anti-Muslim statement, may have contributed to the abuse that she is constantly having to put up with? I've completely lost my place now, but no, I haven't. So, Donald Trump is on the record as saying that his second favourite book after the Bible is The Art of the Deal, written by one Donald J. Trump. Perhaps it would be beneficial if he spent more time reading the Constitution of the United States, because, as President Obama's press secretary pointed out, I certainly will.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, and she's making a very good speech in actual fact. But on the point about the Constitution of the United States, Donald Trump has actually suggested that Cruz can't stand for the presidency either. Cruz, who's the other Republican candidate, in the election race. So it shows it's not just in a way confined to Muslims, but it's confined to other people. So the man's whole attitude is questionable, and where his direction is going politically. But more importantly, where is the Republican Party going, putting two candidates up like that one is as bad as the other?
That's absolutely, I agree with that, and it is a matter for that political party, but it's a very good point to raise, and maybe a very good reason for us all to be supporting Hillary Clinton to become the next President of the United States. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot I'm not allowed to comment on the presidential elections. But as I was about to say, as President Obama's press secretary pointed out, Donald Trump's statements make him unfit to be president, because he cannot pledge to uphold the Constitution of the United States if he doesn't believe in religious liberty and freedom from discrimination. Or is he going to amend the Constitution on his own? And how would the people of the United States put up with that? And whilst Trump's right-wing rhetoric might help him pick up votes in the primary, in the general election, the vast majority of voters in the States will no doubt be horrified that such an individual could lead them on the world stage. Trump believes himself to be plain-spoken, but I don't believe that appealing to, and I understand some of the arguments around people don't want robotic politicians who just churn out pre-rehearsed press statements, but there is a huge difference between that and what we've got here. And I don't believe that appealing to fears and prejudice is a language and common sense of people either here or in the United States. It is tempting to give Trump a taste of his own medicine. It's very tempting to bar him. Would he love it? Would we be giving a gift to him? Would, as some people have argued, just give him even more publicity? Or is the argument stronger that if we let him in, we will give him publicity because, having said what he said and caused such controversy, he'll be on every TV programme and every chat show in the land spouting his nonsense? Although I do see an argument for allowing him to come in and do that, because I do believe that he won't be able to help himself, and he will say things that will render him chargeable and guilty or able to be prosecuted for inciting racial hatred. Finally, he's not a murderer. I'm just going to respond to that comment that was he's not a murderer, but surely the argument can't be that we only want to ban murderers, we only want to jail or charge murderers. There are other crimes, and it is a crime, and it's a crime that has a real impact on people's lives. Maybe not my life, but it has a real impact on many people's lives. Finally, Sir David, there have been suggestions, many suggestions on that side, that we should keep quiet about this. In fact, members of the public who signed the petition, and some of them are here today, that they should just keep quiet. So I'm going to end by letting everyone know that I have an EDM marking today, which is Martin Luther King Day, in fact the 30th anniversary of Martin Luther King Day, and encouraging everyone to sign that EDM if you've not already. And I'm going to quote Martin Luther King, who said, "The ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by the good people. We won't be silenced."
Here's Starmer.
Excellent.
Thank you, Sir David. I, like many others here, welcome this debate, and it's a good thing that 600,000 or so members of the public, one way or the other, have brought this to the attention of the House. There are clearly a wide range of views amongst the public, across all the political parties and across the House itself. And there have been powerful speeches and powerful interventions. But in one important aspect, I think in all of the speeches this afternoon, we are united in condemning the comments of Donald Trump on issues such as Mexican immigrants, Muslims and women. And we should celebrate that, whatever view we take of the proposals in the petitions before us. And I'd like to take this opportunity to add my name to the list of those condemning the comments that have been made. Before turning to the specific question of whether Donald Trump should be banned from entry to the UK, I wanted just to spend a few moments on a wider context, because Donald Trump made his comments about Muslims largely in the aftermath of the San Bernardino shootings on the 2nd of December. That's when he was at his height in relation to those comments. Now, he's not the first, and he won't be the last, to make comments about a community in the wake of a terrorist atrocity. And that gives us the opportunity, I think, this afternoon, just to be absolutely clear that responsibility for terrorist acts lie with terrorists, not with the communities that they purport to come from. And we must be clear what we say about that, even where he is not clear about what he says. And that does give me the opportunity to bring to this debate concern about the rise in hate crime here in the UK. Hate crime has been increasing, as has been mentioned in this debate. It's gone up 18% in 2015. And the number of offences involving religious hatred has more than doubled over the past 3 years. That rise is a concern, but it's not uniform. It always spikes after an atrocity. There's always a reaction in terms of hate crime. And just last month, in my constituency of Holborn and St Pancras, I had convened a meeting with Bengali and Somali women that I was particularly concerned to hear from. And we spent the afternoon discussing their concerns. And this was in December, after the Paris atrocities. And the one thing they raised with me over and over again was that they, the women in my constituency, Muslim women in my constituency, were very concerned that they were being insulted that day, that week, as a result of what had happened in Paris. And they perceived it and they felt it. And they said it was happening in Euston, on the buses, on the trains, when they were shopping, etc. That is happening in our communities, and it does spike after atrocities. And we have to unite about our values and our concern that that should be dealt with. Now, I know that the government is now tracking Muslim hate crime as an independent category, and that's welcome. And I know there are a number of steps being taken to deal with hate crime. And anything the Minister can say to point out what in addition is being done to tackle this kind of hate crime, I think would be welcome. But I do join with other comments when saying that I too and many people here will want to send a message to the Muslim community about how much we value them and what they bring to our societies. Of course.
Yeah. On that point, and I'm extremely grateful to Honourable Member for giving way and the sentiments he makes in terms of talking about the Muslim community. Can I also say to Honourable Member, and I think it's important to put on record, that the Muslim community condemns all type of bigotry, racism, no, regardless of who is spouting that. There seems to be a misconception, not least that's happened throughout this debate, and I refer to comments that I've received during it, that for some reason we think it's acceptable for Muslims to speak in derogatory terms about people of other religions. I think it's very important that we put on record that is absolutely not the case. Wherever the bigotry, racism, hate speech is coming from, it is not acceptable, regardless of who might be delivering the message.
Well, I'm very grateful for that intervention, because I do want to just say a few comments about part of the debate this afternoon about this simplistic approach that says, well, because he wants to ban Muslims, we shouldn't ban him. It is far too simplistic. What lies at the heart of his belief that Muslims should be banned is that he thinks they're all dangerous. That's not buffoonery. That is absolutely repugnant. That is not what leads anybody in this debate, anybody who signed that petition, to suggest that Donald Trump shouldn't come here. It's a very different situation, and that is why his comments are so offensive to that whole community, and of course to women and to Mexicans as well. It's because of the assumptions and the belief that lies behind them. They are, of course.
I don't in any way condone what Donald Trump said, but I don't think it's right in fair dealing to say that if you ban all of X, that means you think that all of X are dangerous, all of whatever group it might be. What you're saying, forgive me, but what you're saying is that a very few from a certain group might be dangerous. And that's where the ban is coming from. I don't condone the logic. I don't condone the policy. But I think in this House of Commons, we have to give fair dealing to the views that have been expressed.
I'm grateful for that intervention. I think we have to be very careful about equating the views of people in this House, members of this House, who call for a ban, and the views of Donald Trump. And I'm afraid, for my part, they do edge towards treating a whole community as a suspect community. It may be, of course, that he doesn't think each and every member of the community, but this has happened before in history, many other contexts, where a whole community has been treated as a suspect community, and we've stood against it in the past, and we should stand against it now. Now, one of the measures, of course, yes, of course.
For giving way, and he comes to this debate with considerable learned and legal experience. Isn't this debate can be tied up in whether Mr. Trump's comments were, as have been described, outrageous comments, or simply, as some of us believe, hate speech? And as his colleague from Birmingham pointed out, there are others who have been banned from this country for saying exactly the same things.
I'm grateful for that intervention. I will come to that, if I may, in just a moment. I am going to deal with that specific issue. Obviously, one of the measures available to the government is to ban any individual for entry to the UK, and that is a power that's been used by successive Home Secretaries on a number of occasions, and many of the examples have been put before the House this afternoon. It is a power that should be applied equally to everybody, whatever their wealth or power, and I think that is important. And I don't hold the view that because someone is a presidential candidate, that gives them any special category. They should be judged in the same way as everybody else on the basis of what they've actually said or done. Of course.
Sarah Woods. Does the honourable gentleman agree, however, that the consequences of this kind of hate speech are greater when they come from high-profile individuals? And as I say, the heart of this debate is whether or not Donald Trump's presence in the UK is conducive to the public good. And we've heard repeatedly about the kind of harms. In fact, the honourable gentleman himself has elucidated the kind of hate crimes that we're talking about here.
I'm grateful for that intervention, and I do accept the substance of it, that certain words in the mouths of certain individuals are more likely to provoke a reaction The question is, what's the test for a ban and whether it has to be linked to public disorder and violence rather than simply offensive. I will come to that, but I do accept the premise that different people will provoke different reactions, sometimes according to who they are. The more simple point I'm making, or the narrower point, is that simply because he has particular wealth or power or particular position shouldn't affect the application of the same rules to him as they'd be applied to anybody else. But the threshold for banning is relatively high, and the power is relatively rarely used. The test, of course, is whether an individual would be, their exclusion from the UK would be conducive to the public good. And in 2005, as has already been mentioned, that was extended to unacceptable behaviours, and that was spelt out. And it is worth just going through the way in which those behaviours were set out as a list of indicative factors in 2005. And there were 4 examples: fomenting, justifying or glorifying terrorist violence in furtherance of particular beliefs, seeking to provoke others to terrorist acts, fomenting other serious criminal activity, or fostering hatred which might lead to intercommunity violence in the UK. So the touchstone has always been words which provoke a response which has an element of disorder or violence in it. And so it is quite a high threshold. And examples have been given of some of the cases that have fallen under those provisions. They were given at the outset of the debate we've had. Now, there's no doubt, I think, that some of Donald Trump's comments have been offensive, shocking and disturbing. And I join with those that say they're not funny. They are repugnant. But they are just that, offensive, shocking and disturbing. And I don't think that in and of itself is enough to provoke a ban at this stage on the basis of what's been said so far. And I do go back to a principle that was set out by the European Court of Human Rights almost a quarter of a century ago in relation to a case where the Sunday Times and our government were slugging it out over Spycatcher. And the European Court said this: freedom of expression constitutes one of the essential foundations of a democratic society. It's applicable not only to information or ideas that are favourably received or regarded as inoffensive, but as a matter of indifference, but also to those that offend, shock or disturb. And the point the court was making is a really important one. Freedom of speech is not needed for speech which is welcome. You don't need a protection for speech which people treat with indifference. It is only relevant, it only bites when you get into the sphere of offensive speech, of shocking speech and disturbing speech. That is the whole point of the protection of free speech. And in this context, therefore, this speech, however offensive, shocking or disturbing, is in fact protected speech under what we conceive to be freedom of expression. Now, how does that translate? Well, of course, I wouldn't want Donald Trump round for dinner to express his views. I do agree with others that we should invite him to join us in our various constituencies and meet our constituents and members of various religious orders and faiths and communities. Actually, listening this afternoon, if he came here, he's obviously going to be really busy because he's going to several constituencies already. I would obviously invite him to mine, that's the end of a long list, to meet members of my constituency, because it is an incredibly diverse, multicultural community. And Donald Trump would see a UK very different to the picture that he painted. But should he be banned from entering the country on the basis of what he said? No, in my view, he shouldn't. He should be met with words far more powerful than his own. I do accept that this is a judgment call, and I respect those, not only this afternoon but on other occasions, who have expressed the contrary view, that this is so close to the line that Donald Trump should in fact have action taken against him. But in the end, we should be guided by our own values and not those of Donald Trump. And our own values include a deep belief in freedom of speech and a deep belief in multi-faith and diverse societies, where everyone feels secure and everyone feels respected. Thank you, Sir David.
Minister.
Thank you, Sir David, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I also at the outset congratulate the Honourable Member for Newport West for the manner in which he has opened this debate, underlining the reasons why we are debating this issue, the importance that in this Parliament we attach to petitions, those supported by the public when they reach a threshold, so that that actually provides voice for the public in this House. And I think that that has been an important addition to our processes. Also, he was right to underline that shared sense of history between the United Kingdom and the United States, and the relationship that we have enjoyed between us over a considerable period of time. I think today's debate has also, as we are debating issues of freedom of speech, underlined the value and importance that this House places on that, and our ability for all different views, all different perspectives, to be able to argue those points clearly and effectively through the impassioned debate that we have had this afternoon. Before I respond to a number of the points raised during this debate, there are a few things I want to say at the outset. Britain is a successful, multiracial, multi-faith, multi-ethnic country. Our strength derives from that diversity. Life in our country is based on fundamental values that have been shaped by our history. They are supported and shared by the overwhelming majority of the population. The rule of law, democracy and individual liberty, freedom of expression, the mutual respect, tolerance and understanding of different faiths and beliefs. These make the foundation of our successful pluralistic nation. They unite us and help our society to thrive. I am proud that our country has so many vibrant, diverse communities constituting people of many faiths, and I celebrate the contribution made by British Muslims in this country in every sphere and in every walk of life. From those who fought in the trenches in World War I and fought fascism in World War II, to the businessmen, doctors, nurses, teachers, members of our armed services and members of this House, some of whom have made powerful and impassioned speeches this afternoon. And they are proud to be both British and Muslim without any contradiction. Yes, the threat from terrorism, both at home and abroad, is serious and it is real. We have seen the damaging and corrosive effects of extremism in our communities. But suggesting that the solution is to ban Muslims who have done nothing wrong ignores the fact that extremism affects all communities and hatred can come from any part of society. It ignores that Muslims are themselves far too often the targets of extremism and hatred, and that around the world many Muslims are killed by terrorism more than any other group. It also gives succour to the false view that Muslims cannot live a purposeful and fulfilled life in the West. Such assertions are fundamentally wrong, and as a country we could not be clearer in saying that. If we are to defeat the threats we face, we need to work together. We need everyone to play a part in stopping the poisonous spread of extremism and helping to protect vulnerable people from being brought towards its twisted ideology. It is that approach this government is seeking to foster. Because we have seen the devastating impact radicalisation can have on individuals, families and communities, and because around the world more than 1.5 billion people of different nationalities, different outlooks and different political persuasions live peacefully practising the Muslim faith. We must protect those who might be vulnerable to the poisonous and pernicious influence of radicalisation. Work with faith groups, community organisations and mosques across this country. This is a job for all of us, and we continue to work in partnership with communities of all faith backgrounds to challenge those who spread hatred and intolerance. We must work with the overwhelming majority of people of this country who abhor the twisted narrative that has seduced some people in our country, and challenge those who use a warped version of faith to undermine our fundamental values. Now, many of the contributions from honourable and right honourable members this evening have focused on Donald Trump's call for a temporary shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. The Prime Minister has said his comments are divisive, unhelpful, and quite simply wrong. And I reiterate his view and profoundly disagree. And in Mr. Trump's comments about the UK and London in particular, again, he could not be further from the truth. We should all be proud of London's status as one of the world's most diverse and tolerant cities, and of the police's role in keeping the entire city safe, working in all communities to protect people from radicalisation. And I pay tribute to their tireless work. I will give way.
You mentioned the Prime Minister. Before he sits down, would he commend the Prime Minister's article in the Times today, in which he says that the key to good race relations is full integration? And the Prime Minister points out there are still a worryingly large number of Muslim women who do not speak English and who are not in the jobs market, and he wants to improve the situation. Would he commend the Prime Minister?
Well, I agree with the policy that the Prime Minister has rightly identified today in seeking to ensure that language is there to ensure that we help migrants to better participate and integrate in everyday life. That is the building block behind the policy that the Prime Minister has rightly identified, and how equally he is being prepared, I think, to look at some of those uncomfortable facts on the fact that 22% of British Muslim women in 2011 spoke poor or no English, compared to only 9% of British Muslim men. I will give way in just 1 second. And therefore, it is how we can target that support at those communities in the greatest need. And that's precisely why Louise Casey has been engaged as part of her work to go about that. I give way to the Honourable Lady.
Does the Minister understand the point I was making earlier, that making this available for migrant people who don't speak English is different to saying that you must do it if you are a Muslim woman? And it shouldn't be aimed at a religion, it should be aimed at people who require the support.
Minister. Well, Sir David, this is not a Muslim-only scheme, and the point that I rightly make is that it is targeted on those communities that are most impacted, most affected, but equally why I make the point about the 22% number that I think the Prime Minister has rightly highlighted in the context of his speech today. Now, to address the issue of exclusion, the Home Secretary has the power to exclude a national from outside of the European Economic Area and refuse them entry to the UK if the Secretary of State has personally directed that the person's exclusion from the UK is conducive to the public good. This power is derived from the royal prerogative and is exercised by the Home Secretary in person. Exclusion decisions are not taken lightly or in isolation. The Home Secretary makes every decision on a case-by-case basis, taking into account the information available and a wide range of policy and operational factors. These factors include views from across government, including from the Department for Communities and Local Government and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. The factors also include consideration of any interference with the person's human rights under the European Convention on Human Rights, such as their Article 10 right to respect for freedom of speech. Now, the Honourable Gentleman for Holborn and St Pancras has also, I think, underlined some of those factors, some of those elements that are part of the policy that we adopt in considering matters of exclusion. But the Home Secretary uses her power to exclude foreign nationals to protect us from national security threats, to protect us from radicalisers and hate preachers, and to protect us from people who seek to undermine our core British values. The policy is not targeted at any particular community. It is targeted at all those who advocate hatred or violence, regardless of their origins or belief. The Home Secretary has prevented neo-Nazis, Islamist extremists and anti-Muslim hate preachers from entering the UK. She has excluded more preachers of hate than any other Home Secretary before her, 103 since 2010. And she will continue to use the exclusion power against those who seek to do us harm. Now, the government has a long-standing policy of not routinely commenting on those who are being considered for exclusion for sound legal reasons, and I will maintain that position this evening. But what I can say is that the US remains our most important bilateral partner. It is in the UK's interests that we engage all presidential candidates, Democratic and Republican, even though we may disagree profoundly on important issues. Where there are clear differences of opinion, the most effective way to influence our American partners is through a frank and open exchange of view, in taking on those arguments. And today's robust debate has, I think, provided a platform to do just that. I can see the Honourable Lady would like to catch my eye.
And the clock. I thank the Minister for letting me in again. I almost forgot what I was going to say. The Minister said that the Home Secretary has a policy position of not commenting on people that are being considered for the exclusion list. Does that mean that he can neither confirm nor deny that Donald Trump is being considered for that exclusion list?
Well, as I say, that we do not comment on individual matters, but I would say that what the Chancellor of the Exchequer has rightly underlined is saying that the best way to defeat nonsense like this is to engage in robust democratic debate and make it very clear that Donald Trump's views are not welcome. Now, we've also had comments in relation to Donald Trump's comments in respect of investment in Scotland. And clearly the appointment of Global Scots are, of course, a matter for the Scottish Government. The UK Government has never given Mr. Trump awards or appointments, honorary or otherwise. Mr. Trump has threatened to withhold investment in Scotland in response to the calls to ban him from the UK. Now, over the years, Mr. Trump has made a number of different statements about the scale of his investment in the UK and his willingness to maintain them. The UK is the #1 destination in Europe for inward investment, and the World Bank has ranked the UK as the 6th easiest place in the world to do business. So any organisation that makes promises about investment in the UK should live up to those promises. In conclusion, Sir David, we will not win the fight against extremism by demonising communities and tarring an entire religion because of the actions of a few. And we will not defeat the threats we face by acting in isolation. We will win the fight by working together, standing shoulder to shoulder with people of different faiths and different backgrounds, defending our values, and by showing that division, hatred and hostility have no place in our societies.
Mr. Paul Flynn. I think the triumph of today is that we've had a debate that's been seen by many people outside, including the United States, and they've seen Parliament at its very best. We've had a diverse debate from a diverse Parliament. And I believe it reinforces the need for the Petitions Committee, a very young committee, an experimental committee that's going very slowly, building a role here. And this was a subject chosen not by any politicians, but by people who initiated and signed that view. I think we are all touched by the accounts by those of the Muslim faith about how devastating the threat from Donald Trump is. But I believe that all that's said today will enhance the standing of this Parliament and will reinforce our relationship with our great ally of the United States.
The question is that this House has considered e-petitions 114003 and 114907 relating to the exclusion of Donald Trump from the UK. As many as are of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. Thank you very much.